Joe Rogan Podcast. Check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
All right, now the first time we did this, my hair was fucked up the whole time, and neither one of y'all told me about it. So I hope we're better friends now.
You just don't say a word.
Is that recorded? Did you record that? We should leave that part in.
I was just like, you look beautiful, Krystal.
I watched it afterwards, and I was like,
mine was
what
fucked
the
up
fuck?
too, you know?
Yeah, but, okay. Number one, it's different. Number two, I had like this piece was like protruding.
I've been bald, like shaved head for like 13 years now or something like that, so I don't even think about it. Like, your hair's fucked up, I'm like, who cares? Yeah, you know, I get it, though. I get it.
Yeah,
Sorry.
It was a real betrayal, but it's okay.
I'm
We're moving
sorry.
forward. We're moving. Well, it's really on him because you and I were just getting to know each other then,
Right.
so it was really his fault.
No.
Dude, yeah. You guys are a very unusual combination. It's very funny because they're like having someone who's on the right and having someone's on the left. It's usually like some sort of a formulaic thing. It's like, you know what I think of? Hannity and Combs.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Well, because it was fake. That was the
Yes,
thing.
exactly.
It's kind of hard to describe what we do. Because if you say, like, you know, we're on the right and we're on the left, it does sound like this sort of
Little
thing
bit
that,
country.
like,
I'm a
or
little
like,
bit rock and roll. Remember
right?
that?
Yes, or like that terrible CNN show Crossfire is the other thing.
Who was on that one?
Well, the original one was Tucker,
Paul Bagala.
Tucker.
Fuck, there were two
And then they
others.
did the reboot of it, which was
Was
rough.
Tucker was on the right and
Yes.
back,
And
even back
Bagala was on
then.
the left, yeah.
And Tucker used to have bow tie on.
That was when he
that
had
was
the bow tie.
and
bow tie.
he's
Bow tie.
never lived down that. Like people still in their head, I feel like that's the picture they get of
He hasn't
Tucker,
even worn a bow
though
tie
he
in
hasn't worn
15
it.
years.
But it's just like seared into people's memories that
That's
this is
Peter
what this man
Hotez, too.
wears.
There's something about bow ties. There's Crossfire.
Yeah, there it is.
Oh, that's Carville. And there's the infamous Jon Stewart when he just destroyed that. Yeah, and then they did the remake with Newt Gingrich.
Oh, my
Remember
wow.
that?
Oh,
yeah,
Elliot
there it is.
Spitzer was on there, right?
No, that was another terrible
so
show.
Newt Gingrich
Yeah.
and Van Jones. And
That was Stephanie Cutter, who was one of the
Yes.
most unlikable people ever created. And then Essie Cuff is actually a long time. She and I were at MSNBC together. So she and I are friends, so I can't say anything bad about her.
seems
She's a very
nice.
nice person, yes.
She seems
I love
nice.
her.
Yeah.
Yep. So anyway,
I don't know
that
who
was
that other
Crossfire.
lady is. I don't
Stephanie
think-
Cutter? She worked for
She didn't-
Obama.
She didn't like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Was she a Hillary person? I can't remember. Yeah. Anyway,
watch those
it
shows.
was bad. It was bad. Anyway, that's not what we're doing. I hope.
What is really no, you're not doing that at all. But what is really fascinating is that having these long form discussions like you guys do, uncensored and undirected, right, without an executive leaning over your shoulder and telling you what to do. It's the best way to discuss things.
Yeah,
and
sure.
when I get to hear from a reasonable person on the left and a reasonable person on the right who respect each other, it's like it gives me hope. Like, hey, we can all get along. Like, we can sort through what's good and what's bad. It's possible.
That is actually the core goal of the show. Because, I mean, we are living through incredibly, like, politically fraught times where
Yes.
you have a lot of people whose whole business model is to persuade you that, like, half the country hates you and is destroying the country and it's existential and we're headed to civil war. And so I feel like if Saagar and I can, you know, agree on some things, which we do, and have debates on topics that are, you know, difficult and tense and fraught, and be able to do that day after day in a way that is respectful, that's like not just trying to score points, but actually trying to learn from each other. You know, I hope it makes a small difference in the political atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm most proud of in our analytics is like half the audience is genuinely right and half the audience is genuinely left. And one of the pitches that we give our people, we're like, hey, if you're going to support us, like, you're not going to agree all the time. So you're almost conditioning people to be like, hey, this is a message that I'm buying into. And I think the most impactful, like sometimes you'll meet people or whatever and they're like, man, you know, I watched the show with my dad. And I'm just like, Dad, like Krystal is what I believe. And Dad is like, I'm with Saagar on some things. And then we sit down and we talk about it afterwards. And like that, we're building that for people. That's so important, man.
Yeah.
It's
It's so
completely
important.
gone.
Because that is one of the dangers in independent media. There's a lot that's so exciting about independent media right now. I mean, you see the traditional media is just like dying. The ratings are failing. People are abandoning them in droves. Obviously, trust has completely fallen off a cliff. But there are some pitfalls in independent media, too. And one of them is that you develop an audience that is one ideology, that just wants to hear one thing and is there to hear what they already think about things. And so I think because of the fact that we have different opinions and our different, political ideologies, that has sort of protected us against having an audience that is there for any one particular idea. And, we'll see sometimes like people go, oh, you guys said this and that. We disagree with you. And it's like, you know what? If this isn't the thing for you, you owe it to yourself to go somewhere else where you're going to hear every day, I guess, whatever it is that you want to be told from within your bubble.
Well, I think you guys have reached a point where I have to give you the speech. And it's like, you got to stop paying attention to the comments.
Yeah, it's so true.
I've been giving this speech for like 3 years.
I've been giving you this speech. I'm telling you, I'm right. I'm right on this.
You are 100%.
You are right.
Kyle actually preaches this to me all the time, too.
Yeah. No, Kyle's indoctrinated.
Yeah, he's fully bought in. He's fully on board with the philosophy. It's so true, though.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's like you feel like you should engage with your fans and everything like that, but you just got to tell them, look, I love you guys. I'm not reading your shit. I love you. I do this for you. I hope you enjoy it. I'm happy that you enjoy it. I'm not reading your shit.
Yeah.
The hardest is whenever it's like people who pay, like help support the show, and they'll be like, I pay $10 a month, and like I pay you to represent me. I'm just like, all right, man.
Yeah.
Like then maybe you should cancel because that's actually not what we're here for.
Not reading that.
Yeah.
I'm not engaging.
Yeah.
I'm not fuck you and you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that.
God, that shit will get in your head too.
Yeah.
It will, and it will
100%.
mess with you in terms of like just your clarity of thought. So
100%.
I mean, the trade-off is sometimes people do have good critiques, valid
Yes.
critiques, good ideas, whatever. So you
100%.
do, there is a trade-off there.
You're missing
but
some of that.
ultimately, I also buy into the Rogan philosophy of just don't read the shit and you'll be a lot happier.
You guys get bigger and bigger, the numbers become more and more untenable. It just becomes ridiculous.
Yeah,
And
that's true,
you
too.
can't engage. And it's also, we are creatures of community. And when there is any negativity, that negativity gets highlighted so much more so than positivity. And by the way, you don't need positivity. You're good. You guys know you're good. You guys, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're objective. Neither one of you is crazy. You
Sometimes.
Yeah, but you're not. You don't have a distorted perception of what you do. You guys do great. You do great work. You try hard. You can't. Like, those little negative ones, they will get in your fucking head.
Yeah.
Because we're creatures of community. And that person that you don't know that lives in fucking Indiana that is on meth and is like really mad because, the progressive in her district doesn't represent her views. And she's like typing the meanest fucking shit. Like, even though you know that that's nonsense, this is probably a crazy person, that's in your head now.
The toughest thing actually was and by doing the show, is actually by disconnecting from the broader, because in traditional media, the way it works is like, we used to go on Fox. When you're in Fox, is like an ecosystem. You're in the green room, there's all the other conservatives that are around you, and then there's all these other people who work in conservative Inc., like conservative world. And you can't dissent. And actually the best, most rewarding part of our show is we're not connected to the system anymore. I'm like, I don't give a shit. Like, they're like, I don't really appreciate what you see, Trump's person or whatever, some Trump flacky is like, you didn't say this about President Trump. I'm like, I don't give a fuck. I'm like, what are you going to do? You're going to take me off Fox? I don't care. I don't actually want to be on Fox. I'm like, I could be on my own show. But being disconnected from like the broader DC machine, it totally frees you up for conversation on Stop the Steal. Anything that's controversial. And I just be like, I think this is bullshit. I truly, 100% guys, I believe this is bullshit. And I see commentators out there who I know don't believe what they're saying and are saying it because they have to. They have to maintain their context. They have to maintain their
100%.
salary. That's the corruption.
That's
That
horrible.
is it.
Yeah.
That is it.
And that's like a self-imposed corruption if you're doing that online.
Yes.
And some people are doing it online.
True.
And you guys are not, and I really appreciate it. I know that if I'm watching you guys, I'm getting like real opinions. Like, I'm getting well thought out, informed opinions, and and you guys are going to be cool to each other.
I mean, we do take it really seriously, and I think we take it this year even more so than ever. Our biggest podcast download and our biggest YouTube numbers last year were right when Russia invaded Ukraine. And, you talk about a high stakes situation where it's very difficult to sort through all the propaganda to really figure out what's going on. And, we were trying our best to do that in real time. And the fact that so many people came to us to try to understand this conflict and what the U.S.'s role in it, what it should be, that really meant a lot, number one. But it also, I think, put on both of our shoulders like a real sense of, all right, we got to make sure we're on top of our shit. We got to read as much as we possibly can. We need to go back and look at like Russian nuclear doctrine and just go as deep as we possibly, are capable of on this topic. Because there are a lot of people who tell us we're it in terms of the news that they consume. So we have shifted to focusing, we still do like fun and stupid and silly topics or whatever and indulge whatever our little hobby horse interests are. But we've shifted the program somewhat to do more hard news because we care about it, because it's important, because there are a lot of people who are looking to us to understand what's going on in the world. And also because ultimately, if there's going to be an alternative to the, liars and propagandists at places like CNN and Fox News and MSNBC and some of the mainstream print outlets as well, you're going to have that kind of, serious coverage of hard news events that people feel like they can trust what you're presenting them. And listen, we say all the time, sometimes we're going to fuck up. Sometimes we're going to be wrong about something. We're going to predict something. It doesn't happen, whatever. That is going to happen 100% of the time. But what you can count on us for is we are always going to come back. We're going to correct it. We're going to own up to the mistakes. Yes. And we are trying from the beginning our very best to sort through what the truth of the situation is.
Yeah, every 6 months I do a monologue. I'm like, here's everything I got wrong. I was like, totally wrong about
People
this.
People love it, too.
Totally wrong
they
about that. And I'm like, here's my thought process at the time. I'm like, I didn't think this was going to happen, but man, Ukraine has been a doozy. I'm like, we've said some controversial shit over the last couple of years. I've never experienced the level of pushback than going against the Ukraine narrative. That is like number one, the most controversial topic I have ever seen discussed yet in politics.
That my favorite moment of the beginning of the Ukraine conflict was Candace Owens having a Twitter battle with the New York Times.
Oh, yes.
Where the New York Times says to Candace Owens, like, where are you getting your information from that they're corrupt in Ukraine?
Corruption, yeah.
And she goes, your newspaper? And then she puts all these different links that show all the different stories from as recently as 2017 that talked about the immense corruption.
I mean,
in Ukraine. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you guys? You're supposed to be the New York Times!
This is one of the primary ways that we've been gaslit in this conflict is like, and it just came out, I don't know if you saw this, you probably did, that Zelensky fired a bunch of his cabinet officials over corruption. And it was like they were taking these fancy vacations to Europe. One of them was accused of basically overcharging the military for meals. And remember, I mean, the amount that we have sent to Ukraine and propping up not only their military, but their government, their economy, et cetera, when they're taking that money, that's like coming directly out of the U.S. taxpayer pocket. And nobody reported on any of this until Zelensky fired people. And then we were allowed to be like, yeah, there's some problems with corruption there, maybe a little bit. Maybe we should like worry a little bit about where the weapons are going and what exactly is happening there. But before then, you weren't allowed to say it.
Even better, the Times actually changed its headline. They were like, Ukraine goes corruption drive. And it was like, Zelensky aims to stamp out corruption, just to make it a little bit less like the appearance. I have some fun numbers for everybody. This is from a past monologue I've done. U.S. aid currently at $100 billion is double what the entire rest of the world has given to Ukraine. In 1 year, surpasses what we gave the Afghan military in 20 years. The total amount to Ukraine now exceeds all U.S. military aid to the country of South Vietnam between 1956 and 1975.
Wow.
$100 billion.
And listen, I think what Russia did was wrong. I think it's an atrocity. I think the Ukrainian cause is just. But the total lack of debate, the lack of willingness to say, like, hey, when we got into this, what you sold to the American people was you were going to provide defensive weapons only so Ukraine could defend itself. Now we're sending tanks. Now we're sending, it just came out, longer range missiles. These were things that were totally off the table. And then suddenly, step by step by step, not only are they on the table, but you're not allowed to question it. You're not allowed to say, hey, guys, are we setting ourselves up for World War III here? Which is something the president himself was talking about not very long ago, and yet no debate. And that's the thing that however you feel about the Ukraine conflict and, the build up to it and how we got here and all of those things, I think at the very base level, the total lack of an ability to have dissent and debate and understand the potential consequences of what we're doing, that is fucking terrifying, because we are talking about a nuclear armed superpower that we are engaged in a proxy war with, and you're basically not allowed to say, hey, how does this end? What do we need to do to try to get to negotiated settlement here? How do we avoid having a conflict with this nuclear armed superpower? World War III seems like a bad thing to have on the table right now.
And you guys are one of the few voices of reason that will say that agree on both sides of the fence. Mm-hmm. And this is a thing that there's a lot of videos out now, and I don't know if these people get these videos, but I get them. I get these videos of horrible war encounters.
Yes.
In Russia and Ukraine. It's horrendous. And it brings me to this thing that I think about a lot, because I think about things that other people do for a living and their jobs, and I think about, like, they live in a world that I don't understand. There's like I'm fascinated by professional chess players. They live in a world that I don't understand because I don't play chess. I love the fact I kind of know how the pieces move, but I've really only played like maybe 10 times my whole life.
Yeah.
There's a thing that people have. It's a quality of being a human being. You only know what you know. And other things become like these sort of like ethereal narratives. They're not necessarily real. And war is one of them.
Yes.
War is one of them. There's a thing that people, the way my friends who've served talk about war is so titanically different than the way people who ideologically support or disavow it. Like, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about if you say there's no need for a military. You're crazy. We are going to get subjugated. Someone will come here with men with guns. If you take away all the guns that everybody has and no more military, we're fucked. And if you don't think that, it's because if you'd never gone to the dark parts of the world, or you've never gone on Telegram. I'll send you some videos. I saw a guy get killed with a hammer yesterday.
Jesus.
This is so important for people to understand, which is that we are 75 years removed from what war on the European continent actually looks like. And, Joe, I'm the same way. I've been on fucking Live Leak, since I was like 12, which is probably bad for you. But,
terrible for you.
Terrible for you.
Terrible for you.
My girlfriend's like, what are you watching? I'm like, what? And she's like a beheading or something like that.
My wife will come into my office and I have to pause videos. And I'm like, you really want to see this? You really
they always say
know
yes,
what I'm watching?
but then they can't handle it.
I can't handle it. I can't handle it.
Yeah,
I don't do well with blood.
The point, though, is that, we have to try and convey this to people and just say, like, hey, when you're on Twitter and you're like, hey, fuck you, anybody who's against the narrative, you're like, this is not a joke. Like, hundreds of thousands of Russians are dead. Hundreds of thousands are Ukrainians are dead. Millions are displaced. We have no idea what the end game is like. And, just what Krystal was saying, I have this thing where, the Fight Club line, like, on a long enough timeline. I mean, like, on a long enough timeline, Ukraine is getting everything that it wanted. So originally it was like no-fly zone, and Biden was like, I'm being responsible. I'm saying no. Well, first they ruled out Patriot missile systems. Patriot missile systems are now on the way to Ukraine. They ruled out tanks. Now tanks are on the way to Ukraine. Right now, there's an article talking about how F-16s, they're thinking about sending Pentagon F-16s. Biden says no now.
Right, exactly.
We'll see.
But he was saying no to tanks.
Right.
Like 5 days before they sent tanks.
And here's the thing.
He doesn't remember that, though.
Yeah,
Right,
you're right.
right.
And
Like,
you gotta dig deep too. Like, for example, originally we're like, we just want Ukraine to take back what it originally lost. And listen, if I was Ukrainian, I'd be pushing for the same thing.
Absolutely.
I have 100% sympathy. They are not in the wrong here. They've been invaded by a foreign and aggressive power. That said, like, we got to think about what's best for us. Right now, there's a New York Times article about U.S. warms to helping Ukraine take back Crimea. I'm like, well, hold on a fucking second. I'm not saying it's just that Russia took Crimea in 2013, but they formally annexed it. And if you ask people in Russia, Crimea is Russia. So if Ukraine uses a Pentagon-provided F-16 to bomb Crimea, now what? Like, now, that's a violation of Russian nuclear doctrine. They've updated their nuclear doctrine, by the way, to not even say it's defensive. They can say they can use it in any capacity that Vladimir Putin wants to. That was a significant change.
Yes.
If you look in the history of the way that the great superpowers actually consider their own nuclear first strike use. It's something that is considered ironclad, and then boom, it changes like that. You're not even going to hear about this.
And I was heartened a while back when there were some leaks that came out of the Biden administration that he, at like a donor event in San Francisco or something, said basically like, we got to make sure we avoid World War III. I'm paraphrasing, but that was he was like, we got to avoid nuclear war. We got to avoid World War III. And I was like, okay, good. He's thinking about that. That caution that existed at that point seems to be totally out of the window. And if you read, the official sort of like state paper, the New York Times, about the administration's thinking, they're like, well, Russia said this nuclear stuff and it didn't happen. So they must just be bluffing. It must just not be real.
Jesus.
And it's like, okay, number one.
Was there a timeline before they could press the button?
Exactly.
And,
they didn't blow up the whole world yet. So we should be fine.
We're fine.
I mean, that's insane, number one. And number two, the idea that Russia hasn't escalated in response to our actions is just not true. They've been striking critical energy infrastructure, including, in and around Kyiv, which was an escalation. They went through with conscription that was very politically dicey for Putin. There's rumors that they may go through with another draft. So the idea that they just took all of this lying down and didn't escalate is a fantasy to start with. But it's incredibly dangerous and foolish to think just because they didn't push the nuclear button yet that, it's all fine and he's just full of it.
Thank God there's people like you guys out there, because there's so many people that they have Ukraine in the same category of importance and significance as they do climate change. Mm-hmm. Climate change, which is a real thing, but it's a politically divisive alleyway where you're not allowed to veer from the course and even look at any kind of science. It's the same thing with Ukraine. A support for Ukraine is undeniable. You must put it in your Twitter bio. And you guys are saying, you're not saying don't support Ukraine, but you're saying, look where this is going. Do you understand what this is? Because you can't just openly support something you don't understand without a comprehensive view of what the fuck the factors are and how it got to be that way in the first place. And you're not going to hear that in a 5-minute clip on mainstream news.
Yes.
You're just not going to.
It's so important for us to internalize that message. We're not saying we hate Ukraine. We're not saying we don't even support Ukraine. The Ukrainian cause is just. What we're saying is, what about our interests?
All the
there
factors.
are interests that supersede Ukraine. If I was Ukrainian, I would do exactly what they were doing. But guess what? Ukraine does not exist without the United States. We provide the vast majority of the military there for the diplomacy perspective. If we cut off military weapons to them tomorrow, that's it. Done. They literally are forced to the negotiating table. I'm not even saying we should do that. I'm saying, what is the end game? And, in my neighborhood, there's more Ukraine flags than there are American flags. It's like Ukraine flag, gay pride flag, no American flag. But then it's like, okay, if you go to those people, and if I would just say what they said, they would say, this is disgusting. This is Russian propaganda. It's up to the Ukrainians for when they want to stop. And I said, yeah, I completely agree. But it's also up to us for whatever we stop providing them weapons. We're like, hey, if you want to defend this part of your territory, that's totally fine. That's our end game. My end game is not having a nuclear conflict, is making sure that we have peace on the European continent. Vladimir Putin is in opposition to that peace. But Putin and Russia are going to exist. Something I think people should take home too is you had Peter Zeihan on. He said it really well, which is the first year of every Russian conflict is a total shit show. If you look at Finland, if you look at the first year of Hitler's invasion, even going all the way back to Napoleon and some of the Tsar's campaigns before that, they lose a shit ton of people. It looks like a complete mess. They fire a bunch of generals, all of this. And then what do? They use their vast the Russian Colossus is known of that for a reason, because they have a shitload of people. They have military materiel. They amass it and they throw it at them. And so people are like, Saagar, Krystal, like what you guys are saying will be valid, but Ukraine is winning. Look, we are barely a year into this. 1 year into the First World War, I could make the easy case that Germany was going to win the First World War. Second World War, I could easily make the case the Nazis were going to win. If I go back to Civil War, I could easily make a case the Confederates were going to win. All three of those, it didn't happen. Why? Because these things go on for a long time. Like, you have no idea what it is. And one of the reasons that many of those conflicts, first and two, went on and ultimately came to the conclusion they were, was because millions of lives were lost. And the whole point from those conflicts, if you look at the way that people talked, was we have to learn the lesson. We have to learn the lesson. But it's been 75 years, and now this is all a game. This is a tweet that people are saying about Ukraine, but it says real-world consequences for people.
That's it. That's it exactly. And the total lack of an ability to have a reasoned debate without just being smeared as a propagandist is
Again, don't read the comments.
It is a terrifying moment. And There's a couple things that do give me some heart, which is number one, even though I can't really blame the people who can't understand seeing it another way, because the propaganda that is coming from every network, really almost across the board, is very strong, and it's very hard to avoid that. So I have sympathy for that perspective. But even so, a poll just came out that had, from NBC News, they buried this at the very end of their write-up of the poll. Public's now 50-50 split on continuing aid to Ukraine. So people are questioning, even though they're being fed so much propaganda. I think that is a credit to the rise of independent media. I think it's also a credit to the fact that they don't fucking trust the mainstream press anymore.
Both things, but because of independent media, the trust is informed, or the lack of trust, rather, is informed.
It's not just knee-jerk. I hope. I mean, that's my hope looking at those numbers. Yeah.
I think your hope is 100% correct. I think you're right. I think you guys are very important. Glenn Greenwald, very important. Jimmy Dore, very important. Kyle Kalinske, very important. People who are real people that actually have done the homework and are going over the details and can inform people. Because there's so many people out there. I talked to Dave Smith about the history of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I was like, what? And he informed me about the coup in 2014. I'm like, my God.
There's a lot of backstory.
And then we played the video on the Colbert Show, the old Colbert Show. Yeah. Which is just fucking
it's Gideon something, the guy from the Times, where he was like...
He's got a book. He's selling a book. Yeah, that's right. In the book, he's comparing Russia and Ukraine to Batman and Robin. And he's like, Ukraine is Robin, and we want to take Robin and bring him over to our side. And it's like this open secret.
They're just openly talking about it. There were cables that actually WikiLeaks released. And a friend who's a great journalist, Branko Marcetic, who's been looking at the Ukraine conflict with a critical eye. He sorted through these cables, and he found all of these diplomatic cables from the prior era where you had NATO allies, you had U.S. officials who were all saying, hey, guys, Russia has red lines here with regard to Ukraine. And floating NATO membership with Ukraine is a real violation of their hard red lines. And we're very fearful. And they laid out exactly the trajectory that we could find ourselves on. Now, that doesn't deny Russia agency or, Putin and the Kremlin agency for invading. No one made them do that. However, it is to say that, there was a time when you were allowed to acknowledge that U.S. policy could lead to this exact event. And now when you even suggest that us, floating NATO membership with Ukraine and saying that they were going to be made apart, that some of these things were exacerbating and they crossed the red line and, created a situation that was incredibly tense where this is the predictable outcome. Again, you're not allowed to talk about that now.
Well, it's also to bring back the chess analogy, is if you looked at war and you ignored the human casualties and the horrors and the fact that it should absolutely be avoided at all costs and all human deaths are valuable and bombing apartment buildings and all the horrible shit. It's terrible and evil. But this isn't like that we are being fed a narrative that Russia made a big move and there was no other moves.
Right.
And when we find out about the moving of weapons closer to Russia, the discussion of them joining NATO, and you realize Russia is getting moved on. There's moves. Now, you absolutely be correct in saying the correct response is not blowing up apartment buildings and starting a war and invading a country. You're right. But this is not an unprovoked situation.
It didn't just come out of nowhere from a madman.
And we're not getting this narrative on television. This is a new time. And the only way to get this discussion is you guys. It's people like you. And that's what's so fucking important about today. And that's what's so dangerous about censorship. And that's what's so dangerous about these partisan ideas where you're willing to absolutely ignore good points that the other side says, because then you would give them some sort of credit in winning this ideological bullshit game we're all playing.
That is so well said.
It drives me nuts, especially on corruption. You were talking about censorship, but corruption is a great one where everybody wants to talk about Hunter Biden on the right. I would listen, we can talk about Hunter Biden all day. We've been covering
We've covered Hunter Biden extensively.
He's a guy who got hooked on drugs.
Right.
Yes.
Okay?
And likes to get his dick sucked.
Yeah, and who doesn't?
Right.
That's not what the problem is. You know, it's just revealing a very corrupt system that everyone wants to ignore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we were
had,
like, hey, let's talk about Jared Kushner. And then a lot of people
Yeah.
on the writers, and I'm like, hey, you know, this guy, it's actually great. They're internal Saudi documents where he asked the Saudi Royal Kingdom Fund or whatever for $1 billion investment in his new fund, private equity fund, right after he leaves the White House. The internal emails are like, I don't think this guy's a very good investor. I'm not sure this would be a good use of our capital. And MBS, the Crown Prince, is like, give him the money. They're like,
he intervened
send him the $1 billion
personally to
Just
get
to give
Jared
this guy
his $2 billion.
$1
I think it was
Maybe $2 billion.
$2
You're
billion
right.
for his fund.
Yeah.
That's a baller friend to have.
Yeah, but if you're on the right, let's not talk about
Yeah,
that. Let's
right.
talk about Hunter Biden and his laptop. And of course, the Democrats. We had Ted Lieu, congressman,
Yes.
on. This
Yeah.
is back in the old days at the Hill at Rising, but I'll never forget. We were pressing him on Hunter Biden and these boards that he was on and the money he was getting, whatever. He's like, people sit on boards and they get paid money. Like, it was so
Jesus
part
Christ.
of the Washington, like the water that they swim
Yeah.
in. He couldn't even conceive that it was a problem. I mean, now it may not be illegal, but that's an issue in and of itself. The fact that he could just hand wave away.
Well,
that
it's semi-legal.
Yes.
Oh, no, it's just straight legal.
Yeah,
that's
but
the,
I mean-
that's the crazy
Yeah.
part.
It's sketchy.
It's legal, but it's
Yeah.
sketchy.
Yes.
Yeah.
But to your point about, you know, censorship and the like total lack of willingness to challenge your own side's narrative. Did you just see this Columbia Journalism Review report that came out about Russiagate? Saagar and I were looking at it.
Oh, it's fantastic.
It's really long, in-depth. I mean, it's overdue, right? It's like way after the fact. But I think this is one of the first, certainly mainstream, and CJR is as mainstream as they come, mainstream attempts to actually go back through the Russiagate narrative, where it started, how it was sold to the American people, and all of the lies and especially the omissions. And they take a really hard look at the New York Times as kind of the main player in the story. There were other villains as well, but the New York Times was the main player. And they would report something that, you know, they would shade it to look as bad as possible with regards to Trump-Russia connections. They would get some other piece of information that was exculpatory, wouldn't be in the paper at all. And they got all kinds of, you know, millions of new subscribers to their paper who were there to hear this, like, you know, elaborate tale of Russian conspiracy and the Manchurian candidate and whatever. And the underlying narrative that at least I take away from the CJR report is the New York Times and MSNBC and a lot of other places. They were more interested in feeding that audience what they wanted to hear than actually looking at the facts of what was happening. And you know, you read it, it is as damning as it could be. And listen, the way we were sold the Iraq War was bad enough. Like, that was a travesty. After the fact, they actually did some correctives that here's what we got wrong and we're sorry and whatever. This, they will never admit that they did anything wrong here. They just move forward and pretend like none of it ever happened. And it is astonishing. And then they turn around and wonder, like, why does no one trust us? We just don't get it.
Yeah, well, we have to make laws against disinformation. That's what we have to do. Misinformation and malinformation, all of those are bad. And this way we can control the narrative.
Are you gonna be the one who determines what's fact and what's fiction?
And actually, in the piece, they were like, the U.S. has the lowest media trust in 42 developed nations. And they're like,
I
yeah,
don't
how does that
think
fucking
that's
happen?
true because I think there's an insanely strong trust in independent media.
You are right. They're pointing to the mainstream media.
You know,
right.
these people that are, they're just who they are. You know who they are. And it's possible to do now. You can be a real person. You don't have to be a propagandist or a spokesperson for the state. You can be a real person and tell people what the fuck is going on. Because this is a wild game that other people are playing on our behalf with money that they've gotten from our taxes, where we don't even get a say in what the fuck they spend it on. It's crazy. It's crazy, and it doesn't affect your daily life. You drive to the same place. You say hi to your neighbors. It seems fine, but you're dealing with a fucking destructive empire that has been doing things to other countries that if you saw them, if you were boots on the ground, you would be horrified. If you watched a drone bomb a wedding party in Yemen, if you were a part of something in another country that we're involved in, that our tax dollars have gone to, that we have just written off as being not of concern.
Right. Right.
which is crazy.
Yemen is a great example. I mean, across the board, humanitarian organizations around the world say this is the greatest humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in the entire world. And, you know, we are highly complicit in this through our support of Saudi Arabia. You don't see Yemen flags from on people's cars. You don't see the news media talking about it. You don't see them humanizing the children that are starving and dying there. And so, you know, part of the way that the information ecosystem is shaped is what they decide to care about, what they decide to cover, the way they decide to cover it, and what just gets pushed off the page entirely, out of sight, out of mind.
I think this is an important part to talk about with this, that with human beings, when human beings work inside corporate systems, and these systems have goals and everyone's working together, and there's a hierarchy of people and you're not allowed to step out of line, we develop a way of thinking that is almost like it's a tribal way and it's kind of a religious way. And I'm curious to know how you guys feel about your ability to be completely independent outside of that and how that's affected the way you think about things. Because for me personally, like having all these conversations with so many different people about so many different subjects, I'm a different person.
Yes.
Like I'm a completely different person. It's shaped me so. It's like the most bombarding, overwhelming education that it's like very difficult to process. But if you're in a corporate environment, it's very hard to think independently. It really is. You don't have the time. You don't have the notion. You definitely don't benefit from it.
You don't have the incentive. That's the big one.
If you speak out, you're fucking penalized. You can lose your job. Just things that aren't even like out of line. Like I remember there was a hockey guy. He was a hockey commentator, and he said that all lives matter, and he got fired.
Holy shit. Yeah. It's like,
It's just like, what an egregious misstep.
Joe,
all lives matter.
You know, I got my start in media on MSNBC.
Yes, I know.
So, I mean, am I a different person from those days? God,
yeah,
I certainly hope so.
That's why I wanted to bring it up to you guys.
I go back and look at it. And, you know, some of it I watch and I'm proud of. You know, I focused on a lot of the same issues I do, like labor and economic inequality, economics, things that I really care a lot about, especially on foreign policy, though. Some of that stuff I go back and watch and I'm like, oh, my God, this is so cringe. And I just bought into the corporate line. Now, ultimately, shortly before I was let go, I did a monologue when Hillary Clinton was building up to run for president. It was back in 2014. So this was early on. And I did this whole thing that was like, she's sold out to Wall Street. People are going to hate this lady. She's like the terrible candidate for the moment. Please don't run. And I was allowed to say it, right? I delivered my thing. I did it exactly how I wanted to do it. Afterwards, I get pulled into an office and, you know, great monologue, everything's fine. But next time you do any commentary on Hillary Clinton, it has to get approved by the president of the network. Yeah. And think about, you know, I mean, I would love to say that I did further Hillary Clinton commentary. There's no doubt about it. But I would love to say that didn't affect me and I was just there to be a truth teller. But listen, I'm a human being. I'm sure I responded to the incentives in that system of like, I don't want to get in trouble with the boss.
For sure.
You know, and that's the way that it works. People, that's a very blatant example, but oftentimes people know where the boundaries are. They know what they're allowed to say, and so they don't need that direct intervention of censorship. And also, by the way, these people, most of them in, you know, cable news, they're not really there because they're talented. They're there because they're reliable purveyors of whatever it is that network wants to purvey. So that's ultimately why they get the job, and they understand the parameters of the task.
Well, there's just a thing that happens when you're connected with someone. If you're connected financially, if you're connected in a friendship way, that's why cronyism works.
Yes.
That's a good point.
Absolutely.
They weasel their way in. And look, I can give you examples of it in my own life.
Yeah.
Like if anybody ever comes to me with any kind of criticism of Dana White, and I'm like, you're going to the wrong guy. Like, that guy's my brother.
Yeah.
I'll never say a bad thing about him. If I didn't know him, if he was some asshole that lived in some other country, I would probably talk shit about him like I talk shit about everything. But I love that guy to death, and I'll never say a bad word about him. So it's like, if you're coming to me for objective journalism about one of my friends, you got the wrong person.
Yeah, but you're open
Yeah.
about it, right?
Yeah.
And
That's the most important
key,
part.
You
which
got
is
the wrong
yeah.
person. I won't say any. I won't lie, but I won't ever say anything negative about my friends. It's just like I don't think that's necessary, and that's something that happens when you get a shit ton of money involved, and you get relationships, and you're drinking scotch together at a private club, and you're discussing the advertising revenue. And we'd like to donate a bunch of money to CNN. We'd like to figure out a way that we can work together. Hey, I'm a fucking Captain Billionaire, and I want to donate all this money to all these people that own media organizations, and I would, I'd like to be your friend.
That's it. It's
That's
fun.
Be your friend.
It's cool, right? Who doesn't
It's
want to
hard
go to
to
fun
resist.
parties?
It's
And-
just friends. We're friends.
Yeah, it's all part of a system, and
We go
that's where
fishing.
This is the other thing. Actually, I was hoping to bring up is I don't think people understand that cable is a fake business model. So, for example, like we talk a lot about the failing ratings. The key demo numbers on all three of these channels is a joke. I always like to say like Krystal and I would be starving in a ditch if we were getting the same numbers as these people. So, how do they survive? It's because they're part of something called the cable bundle. And so, like, when you buy cable, like Cox Communications or whatever, they pay, or Comcast, for example, they pay CNN and MSNBC and Fox to be a part of the bundle. The vast majority of the profit of these cable channels comes from the bundle. So CNN made $1 billion in profit just last year, all propped up by the bundle, because they're getting paid just to exist. I mean, can you imagine if we were getting paid to exist, not based upon our actual numbers? Like,
Yeah.
you can actually reach less people and make more money. And so it's all part of this fake system. But I mean, the benefit is that with the rise of independent media, more and more advertisers are waking up. The less eyeballs, the less of an incentive for the bundle to actually pay them to be a part of it. And that's why I was actually really excited by Amazon striking that deal with the NFL, because I'm like, yes, get the rights away from these people, because that is what props up all kinds of bullshit that we don't have, like a small d democratic input with our eyeballs on CNN or any of these places. They can exist just fine without us. Like, to really kill them, we have to get away from live news on TV. That's the number one thing still propping them up today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of a zombie business model. But I will tell you, I mean, I have a lot of optimism, certainly about what we're doing, about the response to what we're doing, about the independent media ecosystem. But you and I were talking the other day, Joe, about I do think it's a dangerous moment for people. And one thing we've been covering a lot on the show is you have a kind of breakdown in previous national stories and narratives, and people are very like story driven. You have a breakdown in, I'm not a religious person, so this is like not my bag, but you have a breakdown in religion. So some of the stories that have kind of like held the country together and that people helped use to make sense of their life, or even the story about the American dream, a lot of these things are kind of breaking down. Now that's a good thing, because it creates a possibility for a new, more beneficial story. But in the meantime, it is just a like heyday for con artists and charlatans and, people who are willing to sell a narrative to, a lot of folks who feel kind of lost, kind of adrift, and don't like existing in that chaos. So it's like, whether they're being scammed by like SBF or this like Congressman George Santos who like made up every aspect of his life.
That guy's amazing.
Crystal's obsessed with him. I just find him a disgrace.
You see pictures of him where he's a drag
obsessed
queen
with
in
this guy.
Brazil?
Katara.
Yeah, Katara.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think
Drag-ish.
So-
He's just
Now you
drag-ish.
can't criticize him anymore. He's trans.
So I'm the part I'm obsessed with him is, first of all, I just can't imagine being that person who can like, and whoever he was across from, he was gonna tell them what they wanted to hear. When the dude was like, I'm into volleyball, he's like, I was a star volleyball player at a college he didn't
I
even
have
go
a
to.
very good friend who texted me today, and he told me, I'm here with this guy who knew you from Boston and this and that and that and this. And I say, what's his name? He tells me the name. I go, that guy's full of shit. I don't know that guy. And so then he tells me that he took a picture with this guy, and the guy pretended that he was texting it to me.
Whoa.
These are real people.
See that, and that's what,
There's real
okay.
people that are just crazy.
And that's the thing that is, I'm like, how many of these people are out there, number one? And number two, I just feel like his ability to rise and make it to Congress says so much about like the cracks and the holes.
FTX execs maxed out on donations.
I didn't even know that. That's
Too good.
They
Good find,
did.
Jamie.
Of
That's-
course they did. Look at them.
right there is like the perfect news story for our era.
Look at that
This
American
is
flag fucking pin on the lapel. I love it.
This is
I love
America's
it. Keep
congressman right
going.
here.
The
Let's
question
go,
is, what's
champ.
his
This is
name?
America's
Have you seen the
congressman.
video where he's like, "Hi, my name is Anthony DeValder"?
Yeah,
and
he
you're
changes
like,
his
Who
name.
the fuck are you?
He's
Like,
a
what's your name?
full-on con man.
full-on
There's
con man.
so few people that want to be congressmen, and there's so few people that want to get involved that you could be a fucking loon. A fucking loon with all the right bullet points, and you can get all the way in.
Well, he told people what they wanted to hear. You know, to the donors, he was
Yes.
like, I'm a wealthy businessman. I'm highly successful. I worked at Goldman Sachs, all this stuff. They're like, oh, this is our kind of guy. To the electorate in the Republican, he pitched that he's like this trailblazing, you know, American, I am the American dream, like Latino, gay, all this stuff. I mean, it really was incredible the way that he told people what they wanted to hear. And so that's a part that I'm really interested and obsessed with, because all of these people are like a reflection of the holes and vulnerabilities in society. You know, same thing with Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX. He told people in Congress, he told the media, he had this very specific cultivated image of his like wacky hair and his like dressed down look and whatever, that he was the eccentric genius or whatever. And a lot of people who were supposed to be super smart in the business press and in the, you know, regular press and on Capitol Hill, they all bought it hook, line, and sinker.
After Bernie Madoff, you're not going to fool us again.
Oh, yeah, right.
We've got it
We
all.
got-
we
we got it
figured
now.
out. We got it.
It's not like Theranos was like 5 years ago.
Right.
Theranos was an abnormality, sir. It'll never happen again. People like that are rare, and they don't really get through.
It's
they
actually
do.
a good thing, though, just to show people, like, these people aren't that smart. You know, when I first came to D.C., you know, you get to the White House, and you're like, holy shit, like, this is the White House. I remember, you know, it's like when I met Trump and interviewing him, and like in the Oval Office, and I'm like, holy shit, I'm in the Oval. That's JFK who's there, you know, like, this is where Nixon did this thing. But then, you know, like, some guy comes in with his shoes off, and you're like, oh, this is just an office. Like, it's just a normal building. And so you got to take that veneer off. Most people actually get this. I'm probably just weird, which is, like, these people aren't that smart. They, you know, the billionaires, and they're actually fools. Like, Sam Bankman-Fried raised $1 billion. He was literally playing Counter-Strike while he was on a Zoom call. And he was playing a video game. He said some bullshit and like something about a banana, and they gave him $1 billion. And this is one of the top tier venture
VC.
capital firms in the world.
Yes. I
And
mean,
you're
these
like,
are supposed
what?
to be the most sophisticated investors and just totally bamboozled by this guy. And it isn't. And then on the other end, you know, a lot of people who bought into what he was selling, or what, you know, NFTs that were being sold, or whatever random crypto like scams were out there. You know, they had their own vulnerabilities of maybe they were hurt in the financial crash. Maybe they feel like it was disproportionately young men, right? So maybe they feel like the American dream of like getting the house and having the family and the, you know, the like basic middle class prosperity wasn't really open to them. And they're being sold this sort of hero journey narrative about, you know, fortune favors the brave and you got to get in early, and this is secret special knowledge that's going to allow you to achieve your goals of wealth creation that has been held out to you of like what is at the core of being a man. It's a very seductive story. It's a very
Why is it
seductive
all
story.
connected to the manscape? The manscape
right.
and crypto
Yes.
and NFTs.
Because it all
and
is this
This,
hole.
you know, it's interesting. Some of the most viral content that we've done in like the last several months is just problems with men. Like we did this video. It's like the problems of boys and men with an author, Richard Reeves, who's actually fantastic. He wrote a great book on this.
You'd
It
have a
went
great conversation with
super
him, actually.
Viral, and he talks a lot. He's like, look, I understand. He's like, I'm not an anti-feminist. He's like, what we are talking about though is in the last 2 decades we've had a crisis amongst young men, and something we talk about on the show is what Krystal's getting at with the decline of the American dream, like the idea that you were going to do better than your parents, and that's just not really true anymore. Even if you went to school and you have a shit ton of student debt, even if you're working class in terms of wage growth, upward mobility, people who are graduating from high school who are men and working working class having much more trouble actually finding a mate. So there's a big college imbalance right now where a lot of men are dropping out of college. They no longer feel accepted, and you're reaching almost 60-40 splits of women and men in college, especially who are graduating. A lot of women who have college degrees don't actually want to date somebody who doesn't have a college degree. And so there's this big imbalance in the dating market. And then also among single men, you see a big decline in lifetime wages. But what really makes me really sad is the drug overdose numbers, and they die much earlier. They're much less likely to exercise, much less likely to fulfill a stronger life. And that's what gets to the charlatanism of like being able to buy into the charlatan, signing up for some MLN scheme that you might see online, buying crypto. By the way, you're looking at a crypto victim. I lost $5,000 on BlockFi, got fucked out by that.
There's a lot of men that feel by their very existence that they're bad.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a big
they're
cultural
fed this
problem.
thought of toxic masculinity, and the things that they're attracted to, they think they've been told are stupid, or that they're evil, or there's a thing about being a man in this world today that I think we have to look at all human beings as just human beings.
Yeah.
And you can't help that you were born a man, and you can't help the things that you enjoy. Like if you enjoy going to football games, you enjoy getting loud with your friends. This idea of toxic masculinity. It's like, yeah, there's toxic aspects of men, and that's real. That's a reality of being a male human being. If you look at the history of war, it's all started by men. Men did all of it. Men do all the raping. I had this guy on the podcast once. It was hilarious. He goes, actually, statistically speaking, men get raped more than women do. I go, yeah, by other men, you fucking idiot. I go, it's not packs of cheerleaders raping football players. The fuck is wrong with you? The problem is 100% men. That's the problem with manosphere, is that there's grifters in the manosphere that aren't actual real men.
Yes.
And by real men, I mean they don't have resolve. If you took them on a hike, they would get tired. They would sit down. You would have to leave them behind. They're not. The word tough is a word, but it's like oh, you're tough. No, mental toughness is fucking important. It's a really important quality of life, and it's been diminished to this thing that's like a part of toxic masculinity ideology. And
this is where, the Andrew Tates of the world come in and they perform this just caricaturish, ridiculous, masculine, whatever they're doing. And then also maybe is a sex trafficker. We'll find out. We'll see what happens there. But it again speaks to the fact there used to be a really clear sort of cultural narrative, right or wrong, about what it was to be a man. And at the core of that was being a provider, right? For women, it was like, it was other things, being like a mother and a nurturer and like the way you look. For men, it's like about the wallet, right?
Yeah.
The pocketbook. And then, so I think when we've had an assault on the middle class, on the working class, where it becomes so much harder to be able to fulfill that cultural narrative of what it is supposed to be a man. I think that's been, this is as a woman, but, from my external perspective, I think that's been really, really devastating. And I don't want to pretend also, though, like it's like only young men who are getting scammed right now. Everybody has there's, sorry, what was it? LuLaRoe.
Yeah.
And there's a great series about this MLM multi-level marketing scheme of these fucking ugly leggings that a bunch
These things are hideous,
of
Joe.
Midwestern
Fucking hideous.
housewives, for some reason, loved these things. There they are. That's it. Okay.
Okay.
They
First of
are
all,
hideous.
you and I are on the wrong page here, because I think those are kind of fly. I like them. That's some shit. If my wife wore, I'd be like, I like those.
Yeah,
So would you let your wife buy them off
and
Facebook Live from
yeah.
another Mormon
So,
lady?
and here's-
100%. I don't have any say over what she buys. That's how we work.
Get those for your
That's how
wife
we
for her
get along.
birthday and
I
see how
don't-
she feels about it.
I'm a non-criticizer of my wife's behavior.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
But so I mean, the thing that they sold to the women who ended up like selling these beautiful leggings.
I think they're fly.
Beautiful fly
I like 'em.
leggings is-
Stars on them and shit. I like it.
You're going to be able to make your own money. You're going to have like this
Yeah, you
financial
sell them to
independence.
other people who like cool shit.
You're going to be able to still have time with your kids. You're going to be able to have it all. But then as the thing went on, and originally there was like a real demand for these leggings and people really did want them. So you felt like, oh, I'm doing the thing. But then as time goes on, the only people who are making money are the people who are convincing more to get into the legging sales business. And, you know, it's a classic, basically, pyramid scheme. And over time, the quality of the leggings degrade. They're sending out packages that, like, smell bad and they're ripped and whatever. But the bottom line is the only way to make money was by bringing in more people after you, which is definition of MLM. But it's that was the, like, you know, for the Midwestern housewife or whatever.
Maybe they just have a marketing problem because someone should tell them how fly those leggings are and they'd be flying off the
shelf.
You're going to get contacted. You made that fucking guy's day.
You're going to get contacted. Next thing you know, we're going to listen to Joe's podcast and he's like, this is brought to you by LuLaRoe.
I like them. Have some, like, little Minnie Mouses on them. Let's go.
That's all right.
Let's go.
But I think it's also a broader cultural thing where being in the mainstream, you know, mainstream masculinity is not really represented. And because of that, that also opens a space for a lot of grifters. I mean, I was looking at that with the whole Liver King thing. Which I know you covered quite a bit, but I saw something.
Well, I called it.
Yeah.
I didn't cover
did you?
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I called it way in advance. I'm like, that guy's on the sauce.
Just from looking at him?
100%.
Yeah.
So you just don't naturally get that way?
Yeah, you can naturally get that way if you have superior genetics and you're in your 20s.
Yeah, right.
Like if you're in your 20s, this in his 40s.
He's like 45,
He didn't have. He's carrying around too much mass. Like you would have to be in your. By the way, in your 20s, you know, your hormones are flying, right? If you're like 21, 22 years old, there's some natural guys that I follow that are fucking jacked.
Yeah.
But it's a different kind of jacked. That guy's a juiced up jacked. And it's hard. He also, I think something's going on with his abs too. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I don't believe
the surgery? You think that's real?
I don't know. But anyone who's willing to lie about doing steroids when it's so obvious to anyone who understands hormonal optimization and steroid use and like that more plates, more dates guy, Derek, who's I love that guy. You know, he called it, we both called it way in advance. Like, there's not a chance in hell. There's no way. It's like if you look at Mr. Olympia.
Right.
Right? No one thinks they don't take steroids.
Yeah. Right.
Zero people. And you would be correct.
But then when you look at that, like, do you blame him because all his competition's doing the same shit, right?
What is that?
Liver King's just he's an influencer.
No, she means
I'm talking about Mr. Olympia.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's fine. Right.
Of course. That's the same way I think about like Tour de France. Tour de France is a dirty sport. And it always was, and you know the greatest documentary about it is Icarus. And it's not about Tour de France, but it's about bicycle racing and doping and how prevalent it is. And worldwide, it's amazing. Have you seen it?
We had him on the show.
Brian Fogel?
Yeah, we had Brian on the show.
Oh, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
He's the same guy that did The
thing.
Dissident, the Amal Khashoggi documentary, which is another amazing documentary.
Yes.
He's fucking fantastic. But it's a dirty business. It's a dirty business. So other people are doing it too? Okay.
But that's why I want people to be honest in the manosphere.
Yes.
Like, I work out at a bodybuilding gym, and so I'm like, there's guys who are on gear, and then there's guys who aren't fucking on gear. And, like, that's just what it is. But the Liver King thing drove me nuts because you were looking at, like, teenagers who thought they're like, oh, this is real if I eat, like, bull testicles or if I buy, you know, whatever his bullshit supplements are. I don't want to say bullshit. Whatever his supplements
I don't think the supplements are bad because what he's doing is desiccated organ meat.
Right.
And there's actually been peer-reviewed studies on feeding desiccated liver. I think it was see if you can find it. I think it's to mice.
I also want to see the abs when you have a chance.
His abs?
Yeah.
Well, there's quite a few people that have those now. And people are accusing Oscar De La Hoya of having them now.
I saw Oscar say he got etching.
He got etching. Oh, okay. He's being honest.
Yeah, he got it on a radio show.
Oscar's being honest. Good for him.
What do you think, Krystal?
So those look, to me, preposterous.
Yeah.
The amount, it just doesn't make sense. Now, you do have people that are outliers. Like, there's certain people that just have bizarre traps or crazy back muscles. Like, right there, if you show me that picture on the right, I would say, that looks
reasonable.
fine.
Yeah.
That's a guy who's just jacked. But there's something about the one on the far left where he's holding up the piece of liver. Yeah. That is just like, what is going on, man?
Yeah.
Like,
I buy that.
But
especially
also,
knowing now.
Sauce to the fucking gills.
That was the best part about Derek's video. It's like $12,000 a month. His entire hormone
Well, when
stack.
Derek got a hold of all of the, I mean, come on, son. Look, they look great, but.
Do they though? I mean, it's not to my taste. I'll just say that.
Oh, you're just
Ryan
being
Johnson?
nice to Kyle.
see Kyle on the sauce.
It's you know what it is. It's like people like different things, and you can't. Oh, you're wrong. That music sucks. No, it sucks to you.
Yeah.
All right. Some people want a giant, juiced up, fucking Viking dude.
Yeah.
That's what they want, and some people want like an Alex Honnold, who like the guy who climbs the rocks.
Yeah, I love that guy.
Like slim and lean. Like people like different things. So
Yeah.
to some people, that's the optimal physique.
I,
problem is-
listen, I'm
little.
What's
Yeah,
that?
that
Like
looks-
a little different.
yeah,
Stretched out.
but oh my,
position.
yeah, that physique is
Look how
ridiculous.
lean he is.
That's
Yeah.
Defines it, really
freakish.
defines.
It really is freakish.
Well,
I mean,
they, you know, like he's in the middle of full exertion there, right? He's
Right.
throwing a spear. Look, the guy's built like a brick shithouse. No ifs, ands, or buts. And you don't get that way without putting in a lot of work. That guy works hard. There's no way you get there without the hard work. Like the real tragedy in this is that this guy had an opportunity to say what's possible with chemical intervention, and here's the pros and cons, and this is the dangers of it. And also, this is the nutrition that I take to optimize my body, which is also critical. You cannot get to that physique with just steroids. You must have amazing work ethic, incredible discipline, ability to push through exertion, and just have a fucking force of will. And you have to have amazing nutrition. You have to be really fucking healthy to allow all those tissues to recover and nourish them and then stay that lean. So you have to be very disciplined with your diet. So what he's done is very, very, very impressive, but he lied.
right,
Yep.
That's
right.
the problem.
And it's
That's the
such a
problem.
disservice. Is he? I admit I haven't watched a lot of Liver King content. I'm not
You're missing
exactly
out.
in the core demo for this. Is he a charismatic guy?
Oh, yeah,
I mean, you
yeah,
feel like if he hadn't cheated and lied and whatever, he still could have made it.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know. I mean, I think so. I think that there's been a bunch of people that are openly taking performance-enhancing drugs and have enormous social media platforms.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
I don't think that's the problem. I
Right.
think the problem is just being dishonest.
Lying.
If
Yeah.
you're the Liver King and you're talking about your stack and explaining to people what you take and that you're doing it all legally, and then you're also eating all this food, and like the question is that a thing that would influence other people to do that when they shouldn't do that? And I think that's a personal choice. I think the real responsibility that someone has when you're in that situation, if you are doing that stuff, you should be honest about what you're doing, and then also honest if something goes wrong.
Yeah, I think it's important. So I didn't get into health and fitness till like 2 years ago or so, and it's so important to have realistic expectations about what you can do, about what you can get, about what it actually means to diet. So like Dr. Lane Norton, who I use his app Carbon, like, you know, you realize after a couple weeks into a cut, you're like, oh, this fucking sucks, and you're like, and I'm only losing whatever 2 pounds a week, and then also even with heavy resistance training, 4 times a week, diet relatively on point. Shit is hard, man. It takes years. Like, you are not going to look like Liver King overnight. And that's actually
Well, and
important
some
to
people-
understand that.
Well, and I
Like-
mean, number one, you just aren't going to look like Liver King
Right.
unless you do,
Yes,
what he
yes.
did. But number two, I mean, yeah, some people that's just never going to be on the menu.
Totally.
Yeah.
But I'm more saying, like, for kids, especially, I didn't know a fucking thing before I started consuming all this content, like Huberman and all these other folks, Derek, all these videos. And Derek had a video once of a guy who was like 1 year out, I think. It was like, this is what a realistic, like, 6 pounds of muscle looks like. And he was like, yeah, it doesn't look great. He's like, but that's what it looks like, man. And I was like, yeah, that's actually very helpful to me as somebody who was just starting off from the ground. And then I think about 22-year-old me. I would have fallen for it, man. I would have bought the supplements. I would have bought if I was 18 years old, absolutely. I'm like fat kid in College Station. I'm
If
like,
you really thought that's all it took to get
yeah, I'm like,
jacked.
that's all it takes. I'm like,
Yeah.
fuck yeah, I'll
Sign
do
me
it.
up,
It's like
yeah.
you gotta consume good information, have real expectations around that stuff, and that's the biggest problem I think with like manosphere and Instagram culture and all that. There's some great ones out there, like Lane, like Huberman, and a few others, but
There's
a
lot of
fucking
fraudsters. Well, and to go back to Andrew Tate, apparently part of what he's arguing is like, oh, this is just a character that I'm playing. But it's like, at the end of the day, does it
Is
really?
he arguing that?
I think so. I
haven't
think
seen
I
that.
saw that. But at the end of the day, does it matter if you're playing a character if people believe it? Then there's no difference whether you're just like playing a ridiculous character because you're still selling the same thing to a public that's buying it.
Yeah, then what do you do about Stephen Colbert? When the Colbert Report.
You just worship him because he was
just a
great.
character. That was a character.
That was
he
a
was
great one,
great
though.
on that
Oh,
show.
that show
as
was
that character.
so funny.
That
And
character
then
was amazing.
It was.
It was amazing on the Daily Show.
When he went and did the roast of the president at the White House
Yes.
Correspondence with George W. That
so
was so
much
amazing.
better than the real one. Like the real
The
guy
new
that
one
does
is
the talk show. I'm like,
so cringy.
You need to get them Daily Show writers back. Let's go back in the closet, buddy.
Last time we were here,
Put the character back on. It was so much funnier.
I remember last time we were here was the day after he fucked up Jon Stewart's bit. On
about
the Wuhan lab.
about
Yes.
lab.
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
I'm
that's
like, you're
right.
stepping on him. I got
He
that from you.
did
You were like, you're stepping on his
100%
fucking
on
bit.
purpose.
That was
Yeah.
the first time I watched that thing was here
Yeah.
live with you
Yeah.
guys. Hilarious.
Well, the narrative was like you saw his yacht slipping away. It's like, no. Well, I'd like to see some evidence if you have it. I've had dinner with the folks at Pfizer. They're wonderful people.
But I don't even think it's that. I think it's like the social proof thing. Like we were talking about. I mean, people feel like, oh, this is my club and this is my
Yeah.
tribe, and so I gotta represent them, or I'm gonna get backlash. I'm not gonna get invited to the party. That'd
Have
be
you ever seen
terrible.
him dancing
His yacht's
with
not in
Chuck
danger.
Schumer?
Of course.
And when
Yeah,
he
of
high
course I have.
fives Chuck Schumer. It's amazing. It's amazing. You're in the club, buddy. You made it.
Congratulations. Hope it feels good.
But that is what was the only thing that was available until independent media arose.
Yeah.
You had to do that, and if you wanted to be
That's true.
That's why, like, Jay Leno hid in the closet when they were discussing, the Tonight Show. Like, everybody wanted to be the head of a late night talk show, and
Yeah.
if you could find a way to get to that spot, that was the holy grail. That was the thing that everybody wanted to get to.
I watched that documentary, the comedy show or the Comedy Store
Yeah.
about the Comedy Store,
Yeah.
and that era was like so crazy, where it's
Crazy.
like all anybody wanted was to get on that, and that actually, I don't know, I'm of two minds. I didn't grow up in that, I was born in '92, so by the time I was like aware, I was on the internet, but that there seems something comfortable about that mass media environment, like the 3 channels, the Walter Cronkites. Everybody looks at that as an era which was better, but a lot of the reading I've done in terms of JFK and Vietnam lies and all that, I'm like,
Yeah.
I think shit was just as bad. It was like we just didn't hear about it. People just had no idea what was going on.
But I mean, when you talk about JFK, which is this is another one of the things that I've gotten really into. I mean, it's not like the public bought the narrative.
That's
ever.
true. That's
they
true.
never bought the narrative. They still don't buy the narrative. So, but I do think in general, it was easier for them to sell a unified, propagandistic narrative to the
Yes.
American people, except when it came to things that were just farcical on their
Right.
face.
Well, and you have something like a late night talk show. It's so easy to co-opt. All you have to do is just advertise on it,
Right.
and then you kind of control what the people can
Yeah.
and can't talk about. It's not hard at all.
I mean, that's the thing with the existing, the legacy media business models. There's no, CNN has a new boss and he's saying different things and it's like, you're still dealing with the same beast here, though.
Yeah.
Same incentive structure. You're going to find yourself falling into the exact same mistakes and holes. I mean, that's why, you see the same dynamic going on at Twitter right now, where it's like the part of the reason they were making the censorship decisions they were was because of ideology. And I think that comes out in the Twitter files. Like you had a lot of people who didn't want to make a decision. They're just like, that's in general, people don't like being responsible or making decisions. And then you had a couple of really ideological actors. But you also see in the fallout with advertisers fleeing now that a lot of the reason these censorship decisions were driven was about the money. It was about the bottom line. It was still, just like with legacy media, it was the advertisers shaping what was the bounds of acceptable discourse.
Yep.
You see that on Twitter. You see it on YouTube. I mean, anywhere that's ad-supported, you're going to have that same dynamic.
We have that shit constantly on YouTube. It's like you do
yeah.
a video about Jeffrey Epstein, fucking kiss it goodbye. Oh,
Yeah.
you did a video about the vaccine, forget it, kiss it goodbye. You
Yeah.
did a video about
Sometimes
gain
it's-
of function. My favorite was about. Do you remember the Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai?
Yes.
She accused that guy
Yes.
of rape.
Oh, God, I
the video
forgot about
got
that story.
demonetized on our channel, and they were like, "Hey, all videos on sexual assault are demonetized." I was like, "Well, first of all, when you do news, sometimes the news is fucking bad. So I don't know what incentive that you're setting here, but we've done other videos on sexual assault that weren't demonetized."
But yeah,
It's like-
they told us
yeah.
literally anything to do with a Me Too story.
Right.
was demonetized out of the gates. It
Well,
was like
it's
number
controversial,
one.
so
Right.
people don't want their
No, we get it.
advertising.
That's it.
I get it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it,
all
exactly.
is.
But then, you think about the incentive structure you're creating. How many people are going to want to cover those stories,
Yes.
knowing that they're not going to make any money off of
Right.
it? I mean, we built our business model so that we could try to insulate ourselves from those incentives because we're human beings too. And, we don't want to be so arrogant to assume that we're not also shaped by whatever incentive structure we ultimately live in. But yeah, that's how you end up with Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, et cetera, making very similar content moderation decisions because ultimately it's all about what the advertisers are going to feel comfy with.
Want to tell you a story about when we got the Spotify deal?
Yeah.
Tell us.
We were always getting demonetized. We got demonetized. YouTube paid us a lot of money, and I'm not an anti-YouTube person. I love them. I think the problem with YouTube is monitoring at scale.
Yes.
Yes.
And managing the insane amount of content that goes through YouTube. It's fucking impossible. And then you have ideological actors that are inside the company, and you have mandates, and they have their own opinions about things that lean heavily left. But we were getting demonetized like 25% of our videos. But it's like, okay, I don't change. This is what I do, And most of the money that I was making was actually off of advertisers on
Right.
iTunes, on
Right.
Spotify.
So you were good.
So we go over to Spotify, and then magically all our demonetization stops.
Really?
Because they wanted to
All of
get
it.
all
They wanted
the
to
rest
get the
of
money
it.
before we left. So
that's fascinating.
Right, Jamie? Did we have any of them that were demonetized after the Spotify? There might have been like one.
That is fascinating.
Maybe one if we had Alex Jones
Yeah,
on
I was gonna say. I was just gonna say that. They're like, oh, the Alex Jones one. We'd like
Or-
that cash, but we just can't do it.
Yeah, or someone like fucking super off the grid crazy. Someone, I don't remember who it was, but maybe we had one.
Wow.
But it was the difference between 25% of our revenue from
Yeah.
YouTube. And it's a
Wow.
significant
It's a
amount
huge
of money.
deal.
So you
That's
would
crazy.
self-censor. And I know that there's many friends that I have that are making YouTube shows and they self-censor.
Let me give you a good example. We cover the news, obviously. So YouTube has a policy where if you play a clip of Trump claiming that the election was stolen, that they're going to take down that whole video. And I was like, well, so we're a politics show. We cover Donald Trump. When we play clips, that doesn't mean necessarily that we agree or endorse those clips. So how are we supposed to cover the news? And they were like, well, as long as you say that it's not true. And I'm like, yeah, okay, even probably would say that anyway. But it's like, why are you dictating the way that I have to do my coverage? We're going to cover a State of the Union in a couple of days, like a live stream. So that's Biden. I mean, are we supposed to interject every time he says something that's not true and live fact check it? No, because that's outrageous. You play the clip and then afterwards you'd be like, okay, here's what I thought about the State of the Union. If Trump he's going to be possibly the next president of the United States, very least probably the next Republican nominee, how are we supposed to set that standard? Like, you can't just make shit up for people. Like,
if
it's
Nixon
the news.
says, I'm not a crook.
Exactly.
You can't take
You
that
just
off of
play it,
YouTube.
and then you're like,
Yeah.
well, he might be a crook. It's possible.
And right.
yeah, you have to be able to discuss it.
I mean,
If someone says something crazy, you have to refute it.
Yeah.
right. And the other piece is, it'd be one thing if the standards were consistent and clear, but they're just like, you just don't know. I mean, just
Right.
like with your videos,
Yes.
suddenly they were monetized,
Yes.
and who knows why or what happened or what that conversation was like, and so it makes it a challenging situation.
I understand their place. I understand what they're doing. I get it, and I understand they're trying to make us the most money possible. And there's an enormous industry that's around that, and they're incredibly successful. And I'm very, very happy for YouTube.
Same.
But it's an issue.
Yeah.
That in particular is a giant issue. That's a logical problem. But the problem is if you say, okay, we'll let Krystal and Saagar talk about because they're going to mock this guy's claims, but then you're going to have some right-wing like QAnon person who's going to put it, and then they're going to have it, and we need to do this because of that, and then it's a call to arms, and oh, Jesus. And
Well,
then
it's a free country. At the end of the day, you just
Yeah.
got to step back and be like, you know what?
is
that
it a
guy's
free country still?
Well, I don't
that's-
know about
I mean,
that.
and that is
Supposedly.
the thing.
Here's my real question about election fraud.
Yeah.
What percentage of election fraud do you think exists? Because I don't think it's zero.
I don't think it's zero, but I think it's fairly. I mean, they'll go back and do like recounts when you have a close election or whatever. And usually the count changes by maybe 50 or 100 votes, but they've never been able to uncover like a large scale. One of the only ones recently that may have shifted the results. Remember this one in North Carolina?
Yep.
It was actually a Republican candidate who won because they were using this like sketchy system of ballot harvesting, and like that one actually got uncovered, and it was a very close race, and it was enough to throw the result. That's one of the only instances I know where there was enough sufficient to actually change what the result was.
It's important that you ask that question, too, and we covered this at the time. We were like, look, we're not going to make fun of you. We're going to cover every single lawsuit that the Trump campaign filed. We're like, here's the lawsuit. Here's what they allege happened in Milwaukee. Here's what they allege happened in Arizona. Here is what they were able to prove in court. At the end of the day, that's probably what matters, right? Here's the judge ultimately dismissed it in this case. And I believe, I don't remember the exact number of, I want to say it was like 40 or 50 cases. Every single one of them was thrown out. And so I think with election fraud, it's important also to think about like what level of fraud is being alleged, what exists actually today, how corrupt our elections actually used to be. In some measures, we actually have some of the least election fraud in modern American history. We're sitting in Texas. One of my favorite books, Means of Ascent, which is about how LBJ straight up stole the 1948 Senate election here in Texas.
There's a lot that happened with JFK, too.
It's like Box 13, where they straight up stuffed ballots on day 6 of the Democratic primary before the things were about to get counted. And there was a whole Supreme Court loss. Anyway, LBJ is never president without stealing that election. JFK, a lot of dead people voted in Chicago in 1960. West Virginia.
I want to revise my previous statement about that North Carolina election being the only one. I mean, to me, the most obvious example of election fraud was the 2000 presidential election, where it was like, top down, and they had all the officials in place to get them to stop the count, and like, okay, it's going to be George W. Bush. So, in my opinion, that was probably the greatest election fraud.
Yeah, I mean, you got the Secretary of State. What was it? Okay,
yeah.
we're going to have to go.
So you think that was John Kerry, right?
It was Gore.
No, that was Bush v. Gore when it went to the Supreme Court.
Which one was John Kerry?
That was 04.
04 was a weird one too, right?
There were some allegations about Ohio. This was a Democratic allegation against Ohio, which went GOP.
But there was nothing on the level of
2000. So 2000's the one.
Well, 2000, remember, that was with the Hanging Chads. Jeb Bush, George's brother, was the governor of the state.
Yes.
So he was like in control. And so basically, they when it looked like, okay, if we actually count all these ballots, it's going to go to Gore.
Do you remember Hacking Democracy?
Of course, yeah.
Hacking Democracy.
HBO documentary?
HBO Democracy, the documentary rather, that covered the issue with the Diebold machines.
Yes.
The Diebold machines had a third-party input available, where a third party could input information that would change the numbers, and they did it live. Like they did it on film, and they showed how this can be done.
When was this from? I don't know anything about this.
It was about the Bush elections, because one of the allegations was that Diebold was a huge contributor to the Republican Party.
Wasn't there some Cheney connection there too?
Of course. You think that guy doesn't have his fucking hands and everything?
He's like immortal.
He's
too.
literally in the Bible.
It's important though.
He's a man with no heartbeat. Remember when he had that fake heart? We had no heartbeat.
Yeah.
We had no heartbeat.
3 hearts, right? He
had
hearts?
an artificial thing going on where he had no pulse.
Yeah.
So it was just like circulating his blood. Now he's got someone else's heart in there.
He's a creepy one.
I used to have a joke about him that they had one Secret Service agent that didn't get to eat what everybody else ate, and he was like on this like vegan diet, and they were giving him all these pills. Like, what the fuck? Why am I jogging every day?
Oh, he was
and he was just the guy. The moment Cheney drops dead, they fucking shoot this guy in the head.
Takes him duck hunting.
Open up his
organs.
chest and pull his fucking heart out and stuff it into Dick Cheney.
They take him on the duck hunt. Cheney shoots him.
The quail hunt.
I'm sorry.
Well, do you know those are like the most gross hunts of all time? They just open a box and they let these birds fly out. It's called a canned hunt.
Wow.
Yeah, they're the grossest hunts of all time.
How do you even enjoy that?
Well, I don't know. You have to be a person just like shooting birds out of the sky. Yeah. We have this thing, and I did this post once about the hierarchy of dead animals on social media.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I said, okay, I'm going to show you a piece of fish. No one's going to be offended. And then I'm going to show you a dead fish. Still, fish, they don't even take care of their kids. Fuck fish, right? No one cares about fish. And then I was holding up a dead turkey.
Yeah.
Like, this is a turkey I shot.
Okay.
And then I had a package of bear meat. And I'm like, this is just bear meat.
What kind of bear?
A black bear that
right,
I ate.
yeah.
I shot him and I ate him. Like, black bear is a very edible and delicious food. In fact, the pioneers that traveled across the country during the Daniel Boone days, they preferred black bear meat over venison.
Because of the fat, I'm
It
assuming.
just
yeah.
was closer to beef. It's very close to beef. So they
interesting.
ate bears and they used deer for skins. So they all wore their clothes, their buck skins. It was-
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
And a
So-
buck, the word buck, the dollar buck, comes from.
Oh, that's right.
One buckskin is worth $1. So that's where a buck comes from.
Never
I think
knew
you've had
that.
him on. Clay Newcomb, is that right?
Yes,
yeah, he's got a
yes.
great series on this.
He's
I think.
amazing.
He's got a
Clay
great
Newcomb
podcast.
is called the Bear Grease podcast. He's a brilliant guy from Arkansas. I love that guy to death. And he talks about the history of this country and like wild animal conservation and stuff. But that's one of the parts of the story is that like people ate bears. Like that was like the favorite food.
So did
That's
people?
That's the picture of my bear meat.
And so did people where they were like, "You're a monster. You murdered Winnie the Pooh," basically.
No. Everyone was fine with it
They
because
were,
I didn't have a
because it
dead
was
bear.
meat. But if,
Right.
if it was the dead bear,
But if
then
you
that'd
had
be
like
different.
a grip and grin, I think it would be.
Yeah,
different,
well, there's
right?
pictures
Yeah.
of me with a dead bear.
Oh, that's
and
fine.
people get
Yeah.
very upset at it. But look, I ate that bear. And by the way, that bear. Here's something that people need to understand about bears, because people think about bears like oh, this is a beautiful animal in the forest, and it's also a teddy bear. It's Winnie the Pooh. I was there when there was a brawl between a male bear and a female bear. And the female bear scared the male bear off, and the male bear killed one of her cubs, and then
Oh my God.
she ate the cub.
Oh my god!
fucking
So she scared the male bear off of the cub that was killed, and then she ate the cub.
Oh my god!
You know, there's a bear fighting grizzly man.
My friend saw it.
Oh, that's
He was
horrible.
there while this
Jesus
happened,
Christ.
while we were all in camp.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So, and there's, I mean, you're hunting something that can kill you too. There's a kind of a wild part of that too. Like you're not just hunting a deer,
You're
which
not
people
hunting-
don't have a problem with.
You're not hunting quail that have just been released from
Yeah.
a box for your
Well,
pleasure.
my joke about Cheney was he shot his friend in the face and his friend apologized. He was like, "Sorry, I look like a bird. Don't kill me, bro." I mean, he got shot in the face by Darth Vader. You got to let it go. You got to let that one go.
These are all like it's so weird how much the culture has changed, like
Yeah.
in terms of the way that the theocratic right and like the way they would think about like who was advocating for censorship. That's what I grew up in. I grew up here in
Yes.
Texas, and then it's like you get to DC, and then I feel like everything changed.
Well, it
very
was always bipartisan, honestly, because if you go back to the Tipper Gore days, that was Al Gore's wife, and she was the one that was advocating for censorship of rap videos, and
Right.
rap songs.
well,
She
there
wanted
was
to
a
put what was it called?
whole-
The V chip or something like that.
Well,
it
there
was
were-
like the censorship chip in television
It was
or
a
video
whole
games. I
moral
wanna say.
panic around
Yeah.
rap music. That was like what, early '90s.
Well,
80s,
yeah, I
90s
remember.
Stuff.
I was.
Saagar was like,
Oh yeah, there it is.
Not
The
alive
V
This
chip.
is what I got. It prevents blowjobs. This keeps you from getting on a jet. It's going to get you in trouble. Yes. What is
South
that?
Park.
What is that?
South
South
Park.
Park?
Yeah.
Oh my
They don't
god!
miss, man.
The
That's where the-
V
Classic.
chip.
That's where they ended up with just this. They just started
Oh,
rating everything.
TV PG. Yeah.
Yeah, and they started putting the ratings on the video games. And, But
Yeah.
yeah, it was a whole moral panic then.
It was in like 1989, 1990. I remember I was at a gym on a treadmill listening to Straight Outta Compton for the first time. And I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Like, this is crazy. Like, at the time, I was like a young man in my early 20s, was a kickboxer. And I was like, this is kind of nuts.
Wow. Well,
I'm like, fuck the police. I was getting into a ring with fucking no clothes on in my underwear, kicking people in the face. And I was like, these guys
This
are
is
a
a little
little
edgy.
wild. These guys are wild. I
That's
mean, I was
crazy.
living the wildest life. I had no health insurance. I was out there fighting for no money.
my God.
Yeah, I was traveling around the
Wow.
I bet you
country.
felt alive though.
Wow.
Oh
Yeah.
man, I was
Yeah.
alive.
Wow.
But listening to that, I was like, this is crazy. So I can imagine if you're some like dumpy housewife who's married to some politician's like, I'm gonna put a stop to this.
This is
Your son
outrageous.
comes home straight out of Compton. You know, like, no, not my Billy.
Yeah,
you know?
that's so true. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. What I sort of struggle with now, like the music that is popular and like what's age appropriate for my children, even the
Yeah.
censored versions, because it is just like, it is a lot. I'm not saying any of it should be like censored, but in terms of my own personal choices in the household,
I
what's
take
appropriate for the kiddos.
An approach that was, my parents were hippies. Luckily, my mother and my stepfather were hippies, and they didn't care what I did. They were like, I want you to be you. They like, you could swear if you want to.
Wow.
You can say whatever, but don't swear when you go to school. You'll get in trouble. Don't swear around people's parents. They'll get upset at you.
Yeah.
And they just were like real reasonable about it. So because of that, I had this like open way of communication. So I have that with my kids. I'm like, you can swear. My wife used to get upset in the beginning. She was like, stop saying fuck around the kids. I'm like, they need to know that that's a word. Because someday someone's going to say it. It's going to make them feel bad.
But like, I can see that when they're in even like third grade, fourth, where they're able to understand there's things we can say here, but we can't say in this other place. But like, I mean, I have a 5-year-old in kindergarten right now. I don't know that she would really get to make the distinction.
I understand that, but eventually that information is going to get to her.
Sure.
So it's like, when do you tell her Santa Claus isn't real?
I just don't need her teacher thinking I'm a bad person. That's
right.
I live in a small town,
right.
okay? I don't want to be outcast.
She definitely shouldn't be saying
I got to keep up appearances.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying here.
I know that feeling. She definitely shouldn't be saying it. Yeah, don't say it. I mean, I don't say it when I'm around people that I think are going to be offended.
Yeah.
But if I go over someone's house and I meet their parents and they're older folks, I go, hey, what the fuck's going on, Bob? Like, I don't do that.
Yeah, then you're
How
an
are you,
asshole.
sir?
Right,
Nice to
right,
meet you.
right.
Hi, nice to meet you.
I just didn't. I'm not going to say who. I'm not going to name check
It's
them. But
okay.
I did an interview a little while ago, and they sent me a list of words I wasn't allowed to say, and it was fucking
boy.
hilarious.
Well, what was that list that they gave of problematic new words and
Oh,
new
yes.
phrases?
I put that out there.
Yes.
It was like...
What?
Where was that?
Was it
It
a
was from
university?
Stanford University.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Let's pull up the
Wait,
list.
is that the one that said the French? Was
No, that was the AP. That was also
okay.
great.
Did you
That
see
was-
that? The AP
Yes.
put
Yeah.
out like, their style guide or whatever.
Yeah.
It was like, don't put the in front of a group. It could be
Yes.
offensive.
It's othering.
And it's othering.
Yeah.
And one of their
It was like-
examples was
people with disabilities, the French. I was like, well, and it said refer to them as people with, so I was like, people suffering from Frenchness.
Yes. Oh my god.
That is an affliction. That is an affliction.
Oh my god. University
Yes,
language
this is it.
guide.
I love the
Grandfather,
French.
housekeeping, spirit animal are problematic words.
spirit animal?
Spirit animal is a problematic word.
Oh, man.
I thought that was just for
housekeeping,
funsies.
Grandfather?
minority.
I thought that spirit
Ninja.
animal was just a listen, ninja is something you can't take from us. Okay.
Wait.
From the martial arts community, you are not allowed to say that ninja is a pejorative, because ninja is something that we will talk about a guy who's a jiu-jitsu expert and like, dude, that motherfucker's a ninja.
It's a
Like,
compliment.
That's a
Right.
thing. Yeah.
Okay, listen,
Yeah.
I agree with you. But the one that I just can't even understand the rationalization of is grandfather.
Gender?
Like, I
Yeah.
can imagine how a deranged mind would come up with these other ones.
Look what it says. The clause originated in the American South in the 1890s as a way to defy the 15th Amendment and prevent black Americans from voting. What?
Oh, I see, because it was referred to as the grandfather clause. But that means,
but
though, that the grandfather name was grandfathered into the grandfather
Yes,
clause.
because
So
the
why get rid
grandfather
of that?
name,
Yeah.
that's like way before that.
Why don't you just teach people what the grandfather clause
Just,
is?
get rid of that stupid fucking clause. Like, don't get rid of the name grandfather. That's so dumb. There's so many more grandfathers than there are grandfather clauses.
There was another one, Jamie. I think you can look for. I think it was Stanford, and there was one. It was around like merit or something.
Hold on,
like
go
that.
back to that because
Yeah.
it said preferred pronouns are problematic.
Yes.
Where were you right there? Yeah, here it goes. Hold on. The language guide also considers preferred pronouns as problematic because the term preferred suggests that a person's pronouns are optional.
So what are you supposed to say?
Mandatory pronouns.
Your pronouns.
Follow the rules or die.
I like this one, phrases with manpower.
Oh, yes.
Man hour.
That's so
Right.
silly. Well, I mean, that maybe
Man in
you
the
can make an
middle.
argument for that if you're working at a 50-50 fucking workplace, even a 90-10 workplace, and 10% of them are women, like man hours. Like, what about human hours? You can say human hours.
Sure, you can.
You could.
That's not an issue.
Yeah, but are you really taking offense at
But
that?
grandfather,
Right, yeah.
leave grandpa
Yeah,
alone.
come on.
What the fuck are we doing? But the thing is like once people get things established, they never want
Yeah.
to stop. Like we're good, we have a perfect balance in society. No, they want to keep pushing.
Yeah.
And if they're pushing in that general direction to try to restrict language,
Well,
define what's acceptable.
You're right, though, that it is such a bipartisan instinct. It's much more about control than it is anything else. Because we see,
Yes.
like, the right, I think, very strategically has embraced, like, the narrative of, like, freedom of speech, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then you see dudes like Mike Lindell, the pillow guy, starting his own social media platform, and he's like, it's a free speech platform. No curse words allowed. No taking the Lord's name in vain.
What about porn?
No porn.
That's
Definitely
the
no
crazy thing
porn.
about Twitter.
Yeah,
Twitter
I know.
still has hardcore porn, which
They
is
do a-
really weird.
They honestly do a pretty good job, I feel like, of keeping
does that
it.
mean?
Of
doesn't show
keeping
up
it
on my feed.
Exactly. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Is like if you aren't there for like
right, if you're not following.
dicks and asses, you're not going to get it in your feed, and if you are, then you are.
Yeah.
I saw somebody tweeted us once. They're like, "Love Krystal Ball and Saagar." I was like, "Oh, who is this guy?" And I show up, and it's just a giant dick in my face. He's like a male.
He's a
porn
male.
star.
I love that guy.
I was like,
I love that guy. Shout out to him.
They're political
yeah,
too.
Absolutely. They got to fight for their rights, maybe more than anyone else.
Just because you fuck on camera doesn't mean you're not a person.
right. That's all right. Yeah.
It's a wild time to be alive. But that's why I think that a show like yours is so important, because you are from the right and you are from the left, and I think I'm like a person without a country. I'm an island. I really do. I'm so left wing on so many different things. But then they get to a certain number of things, and I'm like, no fucking way. Stop. Because you're denying crazy. You're denying all sorts of real psychological conditions. You're amid backlash. Stanford polls harmful language. Amid backlash. Duh, guys. Get out of your fucking bubble. Those are people that need to read the comments.
I mean,
sometimes people shouldn't, but Stanford should read
They
the
should read
comments.
the comments. I think there's a lot of people who feel like you do, Joe, where they just don't. I mean,
I was so left my whole life.
We both feel the same way you do in terms of like, I don't see myself as like fitting with the Democratic Party and everything that they're doing. I just saw like Nancy Pelosi is endorsing Adam Schiff for California Senate. When you read through the way that man lied to the American public through all of Russiagate, you're like, he should be. He should be like in prison for perjury, not being bolstered by one of the most powerful women in the country for the United States Senate.
Sitting next to Ilhan Omar, where she's apologizing for talking about it's all about the Benjamins.
Yeah,
which is just about money. She's talking about money.
She shouldn't have apologized.
I'll go ahead and
say
that's not an
it.
anti-Semitic statement. I don't think that is. It's about Benjamins or money. The idea that Jewish people are not into money is ridiculous.
Listen.
That's like saying Italians aren't into pizza. It's fucking stupid.
Listen.
It's fucking stupid.
I understand that the way she phrased it, like she could have phrased it a different way so that people would have less of a freak out. But can you not talk about the influence of money in D.C.?
Of course.
This is very obvious. There's a very obvious reason why for my entire life there's been a uniparty consensus around our policy vis-a-vis the Israeli government and a total inability or unwillingness to criticize the Israeli government. It has everything to do with organization and, yes, money, just like every other fucking interest in D.C. And so, the fact that she said that and she got kicked off the Foreign Affairs Committee, look, I have issues and disagreements with Ilhan Omar, but she actually is one of the more courageous voices on foreign policy who's willing to call out some of the hypocrisy and bullshit in U.S. foreign policy. Extremely rare in terms of United States congressmen. So it's actually kind of a real loss that she got kicked off that committee.
Yeah, whether you agree with her or not, she has a bold opinion, and that opinion is not her own. There's many people that have that opinion, and they should be represented.
Totally
My
agree.
point is she's sitting right next to Adam Schiff, and no one says shit. She doesn't say, I probably should have said, hey, motherfucker, what did you say?
Right. Yes.
Yeah, you're right.
You said some crazy shit that wasn't true at all.
No, he was he loved having his face on the cameras during all the Russiagate stuff. And he would go out there and just like go right up to the line of basically saying, yeah, we got the goods on Trump and Russia.
Oh, boy.
And he fed it so hard. And then you look at that and what a disservice it was. What a like giant, elaborate conspiracy was constructed to distract the American people from so many more important things that were going on. And here's one of the key figures. And he is very likely to be the next senator from California, especially with fucking Nancy Pelosi's endorsement now. Insane.
It's fucking ridiculous.
Yeah.
No, I agree. It's also funny in terms of like what you're not allowed to say, what you get censored off of a committee for. I'm like, like you said, look, I don't agree with Ilhan Omar on a lot. I mean, I also don't think that it should be out of bounds to talk about influence of any government, including the Saudi government, of which a lot of these people are on the take of.
Yeah.
This is type of hypocrisy which drives me fucking crazy.
It's
right?
crazy.
Yeah, it's like, they'll censor or they'll go after Eric Swalwell, rightfully, in my opinion, right?
What
for the
did he
whole,
do?
Okay, he had a relationship of some kind with a Chinese spy.
He basically
it may
slept
have been
with the
sexual.
Chinese spy.
It may not have
Some
been.
of those Chinese
he
ladies
says-
are very
he
hot
says
in
it
his
was not.
defense.
And this was apparently before he was married.
Yeah.
It's
and
hard to
he says he
resist.
had
Her
no
name was
idea.
Fang Fang.
Oh,
No
yeah,
idea
great
she was a
name.
Chinese
Right.
spy. But
Jamie,
yeah.
I'm sure you can find a picture of her. There's a
Imagine
picture
you-
of the two of them together.
You get a hot sext from Fang Fang?
Yeah.
What are you
You meet her
gonna
at a
do?
conference. You're a fucking
Yeah.
nerd. You're the weirdo who always
She's
wants
in
to be
her
a congressman.
lingerie in front of a mirror.
I mean,
sends you a picture.
who among
Let's
us?
go. Let's go.
Right.
As long as I don't tell her any secrets. Who gives a shit?
No harm, no
knows?
foul.
You
No
don't
harm,
yeah.
no foul.
No harm, no foul.
There was a.
Yeah.
There we go.
There she is.
There she is.
Look at him and look at her.
Look at him.
Let's go,
He looks like a
champ.
fucking dork. So
Let's
of course he
go,
fell for
champ.
it.
Of course he did.
Yeah.
She had like intentionally, I think my recollection is, infiltrated a bunch of like San Francisco sort of like Democratic donor.
The crazy thing is
circuits.
she's like a 7. You know, imagine if they brought up one of their bombshells. She was probably like the early ones.
Listen.
Like, you know, the Russians send out the first
Oh,
fucking
yeah.
group of people to die.
If you're a 7 and you know how to stroke a congressman's ego, you're gonna be
Bingo.
you're gonna
Oh,
be fine.
yeah, especially
No
with a
problem.
couple of cocktails.
Yeah, you
Let's
didn't
go.
you didn't need to send in a 10. He was
Probably better. You trust the 7.
yeah, that's true.
She's a regular gal.
It was
Right,
like
the
Maria
10 is,
Butina.
like, a little
she was like the
suspicious.
Russian one. She seduced a bunch of like NRA members and
Yes.
stuff. I
Let's
forget.
go.
It was like
Yeah.
2018.
Yeah,
we
that's
actually
a
exchanged
great
her. She's
story.
back in Moscow. She's like, we
Of
did a
course she
prisoner
is.
exchange for her.
Yeah, and now isn't she like a lawmaker?
right.
There
now?
she is. Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
pretty
yeah.
sure she's a lawmaker.
Yeah, you're
now.
right. I think she was elected to the Duma or something like
So
that.
what did she do to the NRA people?
She would go to a bunch of CPAC and NRA conferences and ingratiate herself with GOP officials, and then she would sleep with them and then basically try and get as close to Trump as possible. It's like there's a lot of governments that do this, right? The Israeli government does this, the Russian government, the Chinese government.
What was she trying to do? What was her goal?
It was all like soft power stuff. Like I think a lot of it's related to trying getting sanctions off of certain oligarchs. That's what a lot of it comes back to.
She was in a real like long-term, ultimately relationship with like somebody high up in the NRA.
Yes, yes.
NRA
Wasn't that
don't something like that. Like she was living with him, and like so the idea was to get close to power. I guess basically.
I never saw The Americans.
Oh, great great
That's
show.
all I
Yeah,
heard. Is
same
that it was
thing.
a
Really,
great
I didn't
show.
watch it
But
either.
it's same thing, right? It was like
Yep,
Russian
yeah.
spies that were have
Honeypots.
integrated. Tell me we don't do that too.
Of course we do.
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%. 100%.
It's a dirty world.
Be fools not to.
Yes.
They're doing it.
Why
They're
would
doing
you
it to
not?
us. Yeah.
I mean, that's the argument, like kicking Chinese companies out of America.
Right.
Like, hey, they don't let us do it.
Yeah.
Oh, you know
You know, why
why
not-
too? If you look at it, they explicitly, when they banned Google, Facebook, and all that, they're like, they're going to use it to shape our population and spy on us. Why would we do that? And then we're like, yeah, let's get TikTok on in here. It's all good.
Well, not only
Yeah,
that, let's
yeah.
like let them fly a fucking balloon over the
oh
country.
my god,
Crazy,
What's
right?
going on with this spy
But
balloon?
I mean, the funny thing is, it really is like it's such a shell game because like we know they're spying on us.
Mm-hmm.
They know we're spying on them. But you can't be so fucking obvious about it,
With
where
a
your
spy
spy
balloon?
balloon is there and a commercial airline jet is like spotting it, and so
over
like
a
you can't be
nuclear
so
missile
obvious.
base.
But it's floating
Yeah.
around.
Right.
Does it have power?
Well, so I don't know, but it was spotted actually over one of the 3 sites in the United States which has intercontinental ballistic missiles. And of course, it just happened to fly there, and it would drifted off, of course, according to the Chinese government.
But like we already knew that their spy satellites are able to like see
Right.
this area and
Right.
collect whatever data there is to collect.
So what's the purpose of balloons?
It's a great question.
I don't know.
It's a great question.
Just
I
to
don't know.
stick it in your face?
I
It's
don't
like
know.
when
I think it might be
you remember
part
when
of it,
Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan and China
Yeah.
just shot a bunch of missiles into the ocean,
Yeah.
killed some dolphins.
Yeah, I think
Right.
that was wildly irresponsible of her to go, though. I mean, especially the State Department and Biden, they were like, "Don't."
I did a joke
do
about
this.
it. I was
What'd you
like,
say?
I think they're
What?
trying to kill that lady. She's making too much money. Like, send
Like,
her over there.
Nancy, go
You're,
on.
You're fucking
We've
it up
got
for
a special
everybody.
trip for you.
You're stealing too much money.
Right.
What does it say there,
They don't
Jamie?
care about that, Joe.
The balloon has the ability to maneuver and had changed course.
Right.
Oh,
well, how did it
terrific.
drift off course then? If they have the ability to
it
maneuver,
changed
Yeah.
course.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it didn't drift off course.
Right.
It seems like it's under its own power.
Yeah.
So that's the worry about shooting it down was the payload, like it's large.
The worry was that there would be debris that would hurt the civilian population.
Right.
And then the other thing I saw was that they actually wanted to be able to like observe it more and see what it was and capabilities and whatever. It might be more useful to it in the sky than shot up into a billion
Well, the
pieces.
Avengers have a net they could shoot out of a jet. You telling me the United
They
States
should
doesn't
have
have
done
a
that
net?
shit.
I don't know, man.
That's a compromise position. I like that.
What scares me about this is I don't even. So, did you hear about the circumstance of why it was found? Because a commercial airline pilot is the one who saw it.
Oh.
And so I'm like, well, did we know it was there before?
He was
the
probably so
pilot
bummed
called
out.
it?
He probably was hoping it was a UFO.
Oh, I know.
Please
Like, I got
let
it.
it be a
I
UFO.
got one.
I'm
I
still
got
waiting.
my phone.
Joe
I
Rogan,
know.
he's like, Joe Rogan's going to have me on to
This
talk
is
about
gonna
this.
be great. Well, we were at 35,000 feet. And,
That's too obvious, though. It's too obvious. Yeah, it was too
well, I
rudimentary
always
technology.
wonder about what those things are that people keep spotting. I mean, we don't really totally know about their capabilities.
As you know, I go quite deep on this.
Yeah.
And, yeah. I mean,
Do you go deep on it at all, Krystal, or do you just roll your eyes when you start
She
talking
indulges
UFOs?
me.
I don't roll my eyes.
She just grabbed her drink.
I'm
Yes,
not-
that's an instinct.
I don't roll my eyes. It's not like, I don't go deep the way he does. I find it interesting. I find it question mark, but I can't say I've gone deep down the rabbit hole in this.
There's more important things to concentrate on in the
I
moment.
wouldn't say that. I just say for whatever reason,
See, I
it's not
don't
my
know,
thing
though.
that I'm super fascinated
the
by.
mystery of alien life.
Do you
That's the
think
most
that
interesting thing
is
there is.
a more male-oriented thing?
Definitely possible.
You think so?
Here's the thing.
Why
Out
do you
of
think so?
all the people that I've interviewed that are UFO experts,
Yeah,
they're all men.
dudes.
All Sasquatch experts, all men.
Huh.
I
So
have a
what do
joke
you?
about Sasquatch experts that I think they're all unfuckable white dudes. This is
Hey,
th-
Les
this
Stroud
the-
is a fucking gem, okay?
this
Don't
is
say that about
the
him.
last thing
Yeah.
you're gonna find
Yeah.
when you go looking for Bigfoot. Black people. You're more likely to find Bigfoot than you are black people looking for Bigfoot. It's like a bit I had. I go, it's all unfuckable white dudes.
There's like those shows of Bigfoot.
Okay.
Black people aren't buying it. They're like,
They're like, we got real
what-
shit going on
where
in our
the
lives. We
fuck
don't
did you
need.
guys get excited about this?
It is some white guy shit. That's
It's
so true.
unfuckable white guys.
My friend Essie Cup, who we had on the screen
Yes.
earlier, I wouldn't say she's a Sasquatch expert, but she's super into them.
Of course.
So it's a little tiny fly in the ointment of your
Okay.
theory here.
I don't think it's fair to put Sasquatch and UFO in the same category.
It 100% is. Because I hope they're both real.
Don't.
I hope they're both real.
I just think there's a lot more evidence on the UFO side. I mean,
Yes, there is. But there's also evidence that there was an animal that was a bipedal hominid that lived alongside of human beings.
Oh, interesting.
An
I actually hadn't
enormous
looked into
one.
this.
An
Yeah.
enormous one. It's called Gigantopithecus. It's absolutely real.
In the Pacific
And
Northwest?
There was, it was in Asia. And this was during the time before the Ice Age when the Bering Land Bridge was available. Right. There was an animal that they discovered in an apothecary shop in China. And I believe it was in the 1920s. An anthropologist was there. And he found these enormous primate teeth. I might be fucking this up. I don't think I am, though. He found these enormous primate teeth, and he was like, what the fuck is this? And where'd you get this? And it led to an investigation. They found the site where these things were recovered, and they found more. And they found jaw bones that would indicate that this animal is bipedal, which means it stood up on two legs, and it was fucking enormous. Like 8-foot tall, gorilla-like, orangutan-like creature that existed alongside human beings.
Okay, but we don't know exactly. When did the
We
teeth
know
or
for a
jawbone or whatever
fact that
date
they
to?
existed 100,000 years ago
Okay.
because of these bones. But that doesn't mean they didn't exist 50,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago.
Right.
We don't know. And if they did exist 10,000 years ago, it makes sense why the Native Americans would have many, many names for these creatures. And they didn't really have mythical creatures. That's what a Gigantopithecus would have looked like.
Jesus, wow.
So it was an enormous
crazy.
a great ape that lived alongside us and absolutely 100,000 years ago. And then they found many other creatures that were really interesting that we didn't know existed that absolutely lived alongside human beings. One of them was the Hobbit man from the island of Flores.
Yes,
So
yes.
that's
That one I knew about.
Homo floresiensis, I think.
That was
it's called.
Indonesia, I believe.
Yes.
Right.
Didn't they have some local lore also
Yes.
about that? Like the elders
Mm-hmm.
had some connectivity to when that species existed alongside of them.
Yes, they call it the orang pendek. And by
yes.
the way, Hawaii has a similar legend. I talked to a gentleman in Hawaii when I was there recently, and he was just an old timer. He was great, and he was telling me all the different names that the native Hawaiians have for things, and he was explaining how there was a creature that supposedly lived when the first people got here. And it was a small, hairy, ape-like creature that is similar to what's been spotted in Vietnam and in other parts of the world in these jungle areas. They call it the orang pendek, and it's identical to this hobbit person. So when they existed, who knows? They might have existed 500 years ago or 100 years ago or 50 years ago. We don't fucking know. But we do know that there were a bunch of different kinds of ape-like creatures that existed alongside of us, and they think that these Homo floresiensis were really close to human. They were
Wow.
on a branch, they used tools, they hunted, they worked together, and they might have communicated. They might have had a language. We don't know.
So,
And
yeah,
so
this
this
is
is-
why I think it all connects to UFOs, where it's like, I can't
Yeah.
imagine but stepping back and dreaming of Earth we don't even know what it looked like 2,500 BC.
Right.
Beyond that, we have no idea. That's when written history begins. You've talked a lot with Graham Hancock, his Ancient Apocalypse series. And the reason why I think there's a connectivity is like, what's possible, man?
Yeah.
That's with the UFO thing. I'm like, and if there's ancient life here or multiple forms of alien life or, some connectivity between that or even past contact of all this, it's like our entire understanding of the world is just completely wrong. And I just find that so seductive, I guess, like that idea. Maybe that's foolish and maybe that's, part like a male thing like you're talking about. But there's enough there that we can't help but be interested. We're like, what's happening?
You just persuaded Saagar he was just shitting on the Sasquatch people, and now he's like
well,
all in.
It definitely
I'm talking more
existed.
about Homo florensis. the idea that there was a human civilization like a million years ago.
The Sasquatch is more likely because it definitely existed. Like they know that within the time that human beings were alive, we're going to have stories about this creature. Now, whether or not those stories persist long after the creature is extinct and people pretend they see it when they're really just seeing black bears that are walking upright, which they do all the time. I've seen black bears walk upright. And if black bears have a hurt paw, there was a black bear, a famous black bear in New Jersey that had a hurt, it very badly damaged front paw, so it would walk on its rear legs. It would walk upright like a 7-foot tall animal.
That's crazy.
Which is just like, if you saw it through the trees, you'd be like, oh my God, it's a giant
I saw
ape.
one in Glacier National Park and I was like, holy fuck, these things are so big. I don't think people realize how big bears are. They're
Bears are big.
massive.
Well, if
And
Glacier
moose.
National Park, was it a brown bear or a black bear?
Yeah, there was a black bear and a brown bear. We saw both. I got really lucky.
We were in Montana, and we were at this grizzly preserve, and where they'd taken these problematic grizzlies that like raid people's garbage.
They said
and
grandfather.
Shit. Well, they. Yeah, and they fed this thing a frozen watermelon. And this bear crushed this frozen watermelon like it was a grape, like you and I would do a grape. Just
my
took
God.
giant bites out of a frozen watermelon.
Wow.
And I was like, imagine the power of this fucking thing. Yeah. They're so big.
You ever seen a jaguar? Like
Not in alive.
Yeah, I only saw one in a zoo, but I mean, they are some of the most majestic creatures.
You
that
know about
will
El
ever
Jefe?
see. No, I don't.
El Jefe is the only jaguar in the United States that's been spotted in the United States. They used to be prevalent. Yeah, when the pioneers came across the country, they spotted multiple jaguars. They were everywhere. There's even sightings of jaguars in the northern states. But for whatever reason, they either were wiped out or whatever happened. But there's a jaguar that keeps traveling from Mexico, and that's El Jefe. There he is.
Wow.
There's photos of him.
That's crazy.
You
so
spot, look at him.
How
Look
long
at
did-
that fucking beautiful thing.
I wonder how long jaguars live for, like
It's
what
a
their
good question.
natural lifespan
Well, they know
is.
this one jaguar because they've taken so many trail cam photos of it. Their spots are, you can identify them from their spots if you get still photos
like a
of high
fingerprint
resolution.
kind of thing.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
this one jaguar is just this lone 200-pound cat that makes his way through, and he's just fucking up deer.
That is wild. That is
It's an
wild.
amazing, amazing animal. If there's only one,
There
if
was
they're
a-
everywhere, you're fucked.
Yeah. Nice to watch it on the camera.
Yeah, if you're otherwise you're like a tribe in the Amazon. Like we go to get water, you're fucking terrified.
It's kind
Yeah.
of like wolves. Like, have you ever seen a wolf? They're fucking
Yes.
huge, like
Yeah.
gigantic, and you're like, man, that's pretty scary.
Well,
One of-
we eradicated them,
Yeah.
and then these fucking eco people are like, we need to bring them back. They're our friends.
Yeah.
The wolves are amazing. And until they're eating your family, until they're trying to get into your house.
Your livestock or whatever.
I have a buddy who lives in BC, and he watched one kill a horse.
Wow.
A pack of wolves killed
That's
a horse.
crazy.
So it was like late at night, and they hear all this barking, and then they look out from his fucking bedroom window to one of the stalls, and you see a pack of wolves devouring a horse. Wow.
Jesus.
They got really hungry, and it was cold, and they took a chance.
Wow. There was a story. Sorry, do you remember this? There was this town in New Hampshire that like super ideological libertarians took over. And they like moved to the town. They like voted themselves onto the town council. And they went about getting rid of like every single regulation they possibly could, including the ones that had to do with like the proper way to store your trash to avoid attracting bears. And
I don't remember
sure
this.
enough, you don't remember
No.
this? This made such an impression on me because it was such a such a tale of like ideological arrogance,
Yeah.
They're like, oh, the free market will work it out. Well, next thing you know, bears are coming into town. Bears are mauling people. They had this whole massive like bear mauling issue in this New Hampshire town because of their ideology.
Well, there's a similar situation in New Jersey. In New Jersey has the most bears per capita of any place in the country, including Alaska.
Yeah, I
Wow.
knew that. Yeah.
I think including Alaska.
They have
I'm
a ton
pretty
of
sure.
black bears, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Right.
all black bears. But the governor ran on a platform of getting rid of the bear hunt because people think, most of these people that are in high population areas, they don't have encounters with
Right.
bears. They think of bears like, why would you want to kill a bear, you fucking asshole? But meanwhile, these people are getting killed by bears. A student from Rutgers was killed by a bear. And then they started seeing a giant uptick, 200% uptick in human-bear encounters that were problematic. We've played this video many times of, what is it, Far Rockaway, New Jersey? Is that where it was? Where these fucking enormous bears are duking it out in a really suburban area.
Far
knocking
Rockaway
over
is
trash
like
cans.
New York City
Yeah, I
suburbs,
thought that was like
right?
Queens or something. Yeah.
Is that Far Rockaway? No. What is it? No.
It just sounds right.
It's New Jersey. God damn it! Why can't I remember it? We played this clip. It is Rockaway. Okay. Watch this because it's fucking bonkers. This is on people's. That's like these are 200-300 pound bears.
Oh
They're
my God.
fucking
Backyard,
huge.
Like in your yard.
100% in the yard. And they're fighting over trash. So what happens is they get, or maybe breeding, they get access to the trash in the area, and when then another male is there, they try to scare the male off. And these two bears just start duking it out, and when they start duking it out, they're knocking over trash cans, and they're piling out into the streets. So these people are in their cars filming this.
Oh my God.
I mean, look at giant chunks of fur flying off of them. These are huge bears. These are giant predators that will 100% kill your dog, 100% kill your kids. You leave a baby outside, the baby's dead, the bear eats it and runs away with it. They don't have any morals, they don't have any ethics, they're playing by
Just
a
survival.
totally different set of rules than you would
Survival.
imagine from a Disney movie.
Wow.
But this is what happens when you don't control predators. The wildlife conservationists have long been saying you have to keep these animals in check because it's bad for them, it's bad for the people, and the nutty people are like, yeah, but we're in their area.
But they don't understand, like, right where we are, the hill country.
Yeah.
200 years ago, probably in this spot, it was a bloodbath. It was pure Comanche range versus rival Indian groups, like complete just slaughter for resources. Like, I don't think people really get what it was like even 150 years ago. Like, if you think about Buffalo and the range and the conquering of the Old West. I've read so many books about that time period just because I'm so fascinated by it. But that era of what it was like and what the actual West and the range and all of that was, it was a dangerous place. Like, I've read a lot about Theodore Roosevelt and like some of his original encounters with on some of his hunting trips and with bears and everything. It's just completely outrageous.
Where's the arrowhead, Jamie? Do you know where it is? It's missing. Oh, here it is. We have an arrowhead from here.
Oh, wow.
So I have a friend who has a ranch out here, and their ranch is overwhelmed with arrowheads.
Really?
Yeah, they
Wow.
dig all the time, and they find these things.
That's crazy.
Like, that was an absolute, like, a Native American arrowhead that they used
beautiful.
either
It is
for
beautiful.
war or they used it for hunting.
Aren't you not supposed to pick them up?
I didn't pick it up.
Was there like,
It was a gift. It was a
Just
gift from
showed
a
up
friend.
here.
But it's
Oh,
in
man,
Texas.
this
I
is
think the rules
gorgeous.
are a little bit different because it's their land.
yeah.
I did find one on a hunting trip once in Nevada, and I was informed that I was supposed to leave it behind.
Yeah, I knew that was
Oh,
the law.
interesting.
They're like, because I've
Yeah.
looked for them before too, and they're like, you, even if you find it, you just gotta put
I'm
it
a
back.
lawbreaker, bro. If I
They're
find an
rebel.
arrowhead, that shit's mine.
What,
Like, it's like, I'm not going to leave it here for somebody else to pick up. Get the fuck out of here.
what do you think is the most difficult of the animals that you've hunted? Like what-
Nilgai. I just hunted a nilgai recently, which
what
is
is
it's
that?
an Indian animal that evolved around tigers. And I've never seen an animal that runs so fast when you hit it.
Huh.
I thought I shot this nilgai with a bow and arrow, and it was a perfect shot. And I was really sure that it was a perfect shot. It was a 52-yard shot, centered my pin, watched the arrow hit it, and that animal ran off like on a full sprint like it wasn't even remotely injured. And I was like, oh no. Like, what happened? And it ran 130 yards until it died at a full clip.
Huh.
And
Yeah,
they
it's a whole football field.
Wait, what
And
did
so.
they look like? I've never heard
Yeah.
of that animal.
see if you can pull a photo of a nilgai up.
Where was
Jamie.
this, Joe?
So like,
South Texas.
Oh, interesting.
So
Okay.
there's more Asian and exotic African animals in South Texas than are often in Asia and in Africa. There's some animals that are in their country are endangered, but in Texas they hunt them regularly. That's a nilgai. And that is an animal that evolved around tigers. And those dudes, you can't get close to them. And if you hit them, they run like there's nothing wrong. Like that animal had an arrow that went through its vitals in a perfect shot, passed through its body, went 30 yards past its body where I found the arrow.
It's kind of built different.
Oh
right?
my God!
Like it's
tank.
like a
They're
deer,
tanks.
but like super like
They're tanks.
juiced up.
Yeah. I mean, it was a perfect shot. The animal died.
Wow.
But they say that happens with rifles. They were telling me they shoot those with a 300 Win Mag, and they have to have another one in the chamber because the guide will do a follow-up shot on the animal because they're so fucking tough because they evolved around tigers.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like everybody's like, well, I'll just live off the land. Like, good luck, bitch. You're gonna need a grocery store, motherfucker. You're not designed for this.
That's kind of the scary part, though, when you realize how unconnected you are. Like, if you don't have any
Oh, my
skills.
God.
I've been watching Last of Us, and
Heard
the
it's
HBO
great.
was fucking fantastic.
Really?
The last episode just broke me. People out there know.
No spoilers.
I won't say anything. It's
I'll
just
watch
so
it like 3 years from
hard-
now when it's outdated.
It's brutal. Anyway, I was like, man, because I listened to your Mike Glover episode, and I was like, yeah, man, I gotta get prepared. And I'm like, I don't know, fucking thing. I'm like, what am I doing here? You know?
I
It's
don't
like,
know a thing, and I've been doing it for 12 years.
Yeah.
I've been hunting for 11 years now. Yeah, I'm still a rookie.
It's one of those skills where you have to put it in from a very early age.
Yes.
And when you learn about indigenous tribes, or I read a lot of history, like the Mongols, and you're into as well. They start learning when they're like 3 or 4 years old. Like they start pulling bows before they can, like barely when they can start walking.
Yeah.
And so it becomes part of the actual culture itself. And that level of skill, I don't know if you could teach that at this point.
Oh,
in the
you
West.
could.
You think so?
100%. Yeah, you
Yeah.
could if people had to.
Yeah, that's
people
true.
are so
That's true.
adaptable.
Necessity.
Like we were talking the other day about people that live in the Congo that are working in these cobalt mines. And I was like, you've got to imagine if this is what you were born into, because humans are so adaptable. We're so accustomed to whatever we're accustomed to. And if you live there, you would do what everyone else is doing because you would get by. And if you were born into a nomadic tribe that traveled around and followed the buffalo, you would be hunting them the same way they did. That's just what people do. Right.
Yeah.
We adapt. And that's the whole idea behind Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson's theory about the restarting of human civilization, is that we had achieved a very high level of sophistication, which explains the pyramids and Göbekli Tepe. It explains all these immense stone structures where they move stones with some unknown technology from as many as 500 miles away, 1,000-ton stones through the mountains. We have no idea how the fuck they did it. And then you go 5,000 years later and you have barbarians.
Yeah.
And like, what happened? Well, most likely a fucking natural disaster that forced people to figure out a way to adapt and overcome. And I think that's one of the reasons why, if we go back a few thousand years ago, you have these people with these brilliant minds that live these unbelievably barbaric lives. And I think it's because they're the descendants of people that had to survive whatever was left over after the sophisticated civilization was hit
Got
by
wiped out.
comets.
Crystal just
Yeah.
bought me a copy of the Perry Reese map, that famous map, which was the Ottoman admiral written like 1513. I think he drew it and he based it off from the Library of Alexandria, and it includes that 10,000-year-old coastline of Antarctica.
Pretty good
Yeah.
Christmas gift.
It was a
huh?
great Christmas gift.
It's amazing.
I love that.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And the more evidence that gets uncovered, the more that's a very viable theory.
Huh.
Because of core samples, the hard physical data of those core samples shows that somewhere in the neighborhood of 12,800 years ago, there was massive impacts all over the Earth. As much as 30% of the Earth shows evidence of this. 30% of the Earth shows evidence of iridium in high levels, which is very rare on Earth, but very common in space. Nano diamonds from the impact, carbon from burnt everything. I think people got fucked up somewhere around 12,800 years ago, the end of the Ice Age. And I think those guys are right. I think the more data that gets uncovered, which is like almost every day, they're finding new discoveries that point to that. They're finding new impact craters. They found a giant impact crater in Antarctica. They found a giant one off the coast of New Zealand. Like, we get hit. And when we get hit, all bets are off. All your fucking hard drives are useless. All the known knowledge that you get off the internet is no longer available to you. And we start from scratch. And that is a 100% possibility for us right now.
Oh,
right,
yeah.
right now we're like fearful of sort of the other direction. Have you played with the Chat GPT stuff, like the AI that's like gonna? I don't know,
Yeah.
revolutionize everything.
Yeah.
Or will it? We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, right? Like, we've been playing with it. We're actually, we're doing a live show tonight in Austin, and well, it'll be last night by the time this comes out, probably. But we put into the Chat GPT, like, write a monologue in the voice of Saagar Enjeti about UFOs, and it does a thing.
Yeah.
It's service, like, the grammar is good. You know, it doesn't sound like Saagar at all. Like the sort of grammar they use and the way
It'll be
they
like,
approach
ladies and gentlemen, it's time we have an important conversation
I can
about
see you saying that.
UFOs. Yes.
If you wanted to be grandiose, it was a very important
It'd be
point.
like that'd be like 90s politician, like, ladies and gentlemen, it's time we have an
Have
important
you heard
conversation.
Lex Friedman talk about it, though? Lex was
I
on my
hadn't gotten fully
podcast
through your podcast.
Oh,
the other day.
I'd
and
be interested to hear what he has to say. Yeah.
He said Chat 4.0 is on the way.
Oh,
And
that's
he
right,
said
because
it's
it has
gonna
more
be-
information that's going to be
It's
available
going to be way, way better.
See, I listened to Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, which makes ChatGPT. I heard he got a question about the fourth version because there is a lot of speculation that it's going to be like a whole other universe in terms of its capabilities, that it's going to be more closely approximating actual intelligence in a way that's going to really super freak people out. Like that's what a lot of people like Lex and others, I guess, are projecting. He was really trying to pour cold water on that idea, but that may just be because he doesn't want to get it overhyped. He wants to set the bar low so that when the thing actually drops, you know, it lands with a appropriate, I guess, fanfare.
The real thing of concern is that this didn't exist 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and now it exists and it's gotten better really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Maybe it did exist 2 years ago, but it wasn't publicly consumable.
It didn't have a chat function.
Right.
That was a thing.
See, that's the thing is actually, this was, again, you know, listening to this interview with Sam Altman, he was talking about how he was actually really surprised by the way that the public, when they got to play with it, were like, oh my God. Because in his mind, working so closely with the technology, this just felt like the next logical step. But for people who hadn't been deeply, you know, enmeshed in the details of the technology, when suddenly you had this thing in front of you and you could play with it, and then you've got this, like, the image generators and whatever, that it kind of blew people's minds. And we've been talking about how you've got universities, professors who are freaked out.
Yeah, this is our favorite.
About kids cheating on tests and, you know, using this to write their essays and whatever. And so I do think it's going to require a kind of entire rethink of the university experience, of which parts of what human beings can do are more difficult to replicate by the machine. Because the machine can spit out a Saagar Enjeti theoretical UFO monologue, but it can't create new ideas, right? It's lacking a sort of like creativity.
For now.
Yeah,
soulful,
for now.
Yes, for now.
For now. That's the real thing is for now. Because I think it's going to. And I think within 5 years it's going to be better at us.
Oh.
Better at being us than us.
But that's actually important, and that's one of the fun things that we're seeing through the ChatGPT education, which I love. And actually, it's fascinating. We get a ton of feedback on those segments because it's a lot of college kids are fed up with bullshit busy work. A lot of professors are tearing up their entire syllabus, and they're like, all right, now we're going to go to oral examination. We're going to have a discussion in class. And I was like, that's great. That's fantastic. You shouldn't be doing a bullshit essay, first draft.
But that also teaches you how to write, which is actually important.
Actually, I don't know if it does, actually.
Well, it could.
Well, yes.
Well, but if you have, the comparison they make is to like the invention of the calculator.
Yeah.
It's like you still need to understand the math to know what to put into the calculator.
Right.
But you don't need to know how to do all that shit by hand.
Can we pause this? I have to pee so
Yeah,
bad.
yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Let's use the
I need to pee
restroom.
too.
We're right back. Woo!
All right, we're back.
Think so much better.
What
were we?
ChatGPT.
ChatGPT,
yes.
colleges.
And cheating.
Yeah.
And I do think part of the freak out right now is because most automation that has like killed people's jobs has been service workers, it's been blue collar. And now you have a lot of white collar workers who are like, oh shit, this could be coming for me.
Did you see the BuzzFeed thing? That
No, I did
BuzzFeed
not.
hired ChatGPT, or is going to use ChatGPT to auto-generate listicles.
Yeah, they laid off.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah,
they just
they-
laid 10% of their staff
Oh
off.
my
Right.
god.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
and
this
by the
is
way,
the big fear,
and their
right?
stock didn't their stock like
Yeah, their stock went up by,
skyrocket?
I want to say 95% in a single day.
Fire people.
Yeah.
Give me more money.
Yay! Hooray! What a great system we have.
Not great. Yeah.
But doesn't that leave room for Substack people?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
doesn't it leave room for creators that you get an obvious look into their mind and they take pride in their writing? I would say to young kids, I would say fuck around with ChatGPT. I would say figure out what it does because it's an important thing. But learn how to write. I think it's good for you. And I think if you want to get better at whatever you're doing that requires writing, like if you're going to be a journalist, even if you use ChatGPT to give you a framework, you should learn how to be creative.
Absolutely.
Well,
it's good for you.
Yeah.
I do think that's a good point, and it's where the calculator analogy kind of fails because the calculations are the calculations. There's no
Yes.
like style or voice that
Right.
goes into it.
Right.
Whereas, Saagar and I write a lot every single week. I know you write a lot as part of, being a comedian. And when you do that a lot over time, you develop your own voice, you develop your
Yes.
own style that you maybe aren't going to come to if you're starting with the ChatGPT framework. Even if you're not just wholesale, like taking whatever chat gives you and like selling that off as your own, even if you're taking it and workshopping, whatever, it's not quite the same
Right.
as staring at the blank piece of paper and creating it in your voice, unique
And the
voice from
satisfaction that you
scratch.
get.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The satisfaction when you write something that you enjoy, that you're like, oh, I did a lot
Yeah.
of work on this, and I'm
I
really
nailed
proud of it.
Yeah,
proud.
it is. I mean, we write these monologues for the show, and like we do 3 a week. So some of them are going to be great, some of them are going to be, solid. Some are going to be like, it was a bit of a struggle. But when you get that one that it's like you have the idea and you're able to lay it out in a way that you feel like really captures what you were trying to say and like makes a point that you feel like hasn't been made before, it's a wonderful.
That's
feeling.
why I'm celebrating it with the classroom, though, because I had to do when I was in college. Like, we had so many bullshit, like busy work quizzes that they were just doing to assign so they could check a box on the syllabus. Now they're sitting in the classroom being like, "What do you think?" They have to test you
Yeah.
live to see if you're
Yeah.
either paying attention. I think that's great. Like, that's ultimately like, what did we really get out of college? Like, I don't know. In terms of what I use right now. Even you were talking about writing. A lot of that was bullshit academic writing. When I learned how to write for journalism, it's totally different. It's like all the opposite rules, actually, in terms of the way you do it. But from what's useful in life is being able to understand ideas. Part of what our show is consider an alternative point of view. The famous Plato quote, "The mark of an intelligent mind to consider an opinion, something like an opinion that he doesn't necessarily agree with." I'm butchering it, but that is what you could possibly get out of higher education today. Coming together, taking a 4-year pause in your life, talking with this professor. There's a professor right now at UPenn, Wharton, who's actually requiring ChatGPT in the classroom. He's like, no, for entrepreneurship, we're all going to use it. We're going to learn how to use this tool together, and then we're going to talk about it in the classroom. That's what education actually can be. And so I talk a lot about higher education corruption, and really what it is to me is, places charging $80,000 a year, which is outrageous, putting these kids into debt and not teaching them anything which is actually useful in the real world.
Well,
and I
it's
think
just-
this is useful.
it's just like
talking, learning.
It's just like a stamp of
Yeah, it's a
approval.
credential.
It's a credential.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
it is. I mean, I will say, so I studied economics, and we obviously talk a lot about economics, but the shit that I learned was like, it was all very doctrinaire. It was
Right.
all very like
Supply and demand.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a lot of stuff I had to like unlearn the propaganda of, ultimately.
Oh, that's a great point too. This is how the Federal Reserve works, and then we're doing all these segments about the Fed. I'm like, well, maybe it shouldn't. And then it's like, oh, this is all a human design system. So you read books. It's like something on Jekyll Island on the creation of the Fed, and then what the Fed's actual mandate is, and you're like, oh, the Fed has a lot of power over our society, over our economy, over our politics. Actually, like there's a lot of arguments about certain politicians never would have gone if the Fed hadn't been doing the policies that they had, like Jimmy Carter in 1979 with Paul Volcker.
Mm-hmm.
We're living actually in an era right now of tremendous departure from previous Federal Reserve policy. We went from a zero interest rate environment to higher interest rates. The economy right now is the craziest thing you've ever seen. So the jobs numbers actually came out this morning. We are at one of the lowest unemployment rates in modern American
Since
history.
1969.
Right. So it's a great economy, right? But wage stagnation. It's not keeping up with inflation of goods. Try buying a house right now. Mortgage rates are a disaster. They're falling slightly. We've been talking a lot about the used car industry. Car loans are a total nightmare. You're seeing all these charlatans in the economy. Like, what is this? What has been created? The tech layoffs is a good example. You have Google cutting 10%, Amazon cutting 10,000 jobs, Salesforce cutting 10,000 jobs. All of this was just because of cheap money. And so that makes you take a step back and be like, wow, like the Fed is a non-democratic institution. You and I have no input on the Fed whatsoever. The president appoints a chair and the rest of those people get confirmed by Congress. And then after that, it's up to them. They could nuke the entire U.S. economy if they wanted to. It's literally up to like 14 people. And you're like, holy shit. Like,
well,
so much of my life is determined by these folks. And I don't think people realize that.
And it's intentional that they make it very opaque and make people feel dumb, like they don't understand
It's intentional?
Very intentional. This is actually Alan Greenspan sort of innovated this of like Fed speak, where any pronouncement he made was like incomprehensible if you didn't have a PhD in economics. And it hasn't always been like that in American history. You know, Fed policy, monetary policy was hotly debated. There were like populist revolts over it.
William Jennings Bryan.
There's a real anti-populist movement to consolidate power in the hands of a few like credentialed bureaucrats by posturing like, oh, we're just sort of like doing the math and it's just a calculation and there's no morals involved. We don't need to understand what other people think about it. And to make it feel like, oh, we've got this because we're the credentialed experts when, you know, in reality, these are things that affect people's lives. But on the fakery in the economy, I think this is one of the undertold stories of our era. We're talking a lot about incentives earlier. The incentives for corporate America are not to innovate, not to create new products, certainly not to invest in their workforce. It's all to engage in financial engineering to reward themselves and their stockholders. So stock buybacks, this year I just saw a stat, largest first quarter or first month of the year stock buybacks that we've ever had. You look at companies like airline companies where you think, oh, they're making their money by like flying people around and whatever. No, actually, they're giant hedge funds and like most of their money comes from financial manipulation. And like it started with hedging, let me hedge the cost of jet fuel, but then that turns into big business. And so they basically become Wall Street. Apple, this is one of Rana Foroohar, who's a very great, very smart financial thinker. Yeah. She wrote a book that highlighted this statistic. Apple, when they released the iPod, their stock that year actually went down. When they did financial manipulation and like gigantic stock buybacks, their stock goes up. So it just shows you how much of our whole economy, big picture, is basically fake, geared towards financial engineering and not towards actual innovation, development, like growing a company based on a good idea and a good product.
Oof.
Well, you talk about this with your phone all the time, right? You're like, my iPhone, what was like iPhone 4 is not all that different from iPhone 14. That's an exaggeration, but like iPhone 11 and iPhone 14 aren't that different. Apple has actually increased its revenue significantly through its bundle of services, by increasing the amount of cost that it can pull from the App Store. I've got my Mac here, so everything is locked in here. Software as a service, everything is linked into the Apple bundle. Tim Cook's great. There's a great book. I forget exactly the name. I think it's Apple Life After Steve. So after Steve Jobs died, Steve was a product guy. He would invest hundreds of billions of dollars into R&D, into creating game-changing, beautiful new products. Tim Cook is a managerial type. His job is to squeeze as much money out of the stock price. So how do you do that? A, you park $100 billion or whatever overseas so you don't have to pay taxes on it. B, you don't invest necessarily in brand new R&D. You invest in making sure that people get the new phone every year. You invest in paying $299 for that iCloud bubble. I mean, imagine what that is at scale. And at scale, what they're doing is locking people into services with Apple, which are recurring subscription revenue. It's a shitload of money. And I think their stock is like at the highest level ever. But when's the last time you have a Tesla? Like when you got into a Tesla, it's like picking up the iPhone 4 for the first time. And you're like, holy fuck, like I can't even believe this is real. Like this is a new thing. The first time I had an iPhone 4 and it had that beautiful back and it was like Steve Jobs described it as looking like a Leica camera or something. I remember holding it and just being like, this is the coolest fucking thing I've ever seen. I felt the same way whenever I got into a Tesla. I'm like, I'm not in a car, I'm in a computer. I'm in a computer that drives. And that leap, like think about how rare that is over the last 20 years. You had Mark Andreessen on, and Peter Thiel also has a famous quote on this. He's like, we were promised flying cars and all we got was 140 characters, except now we have 280 characters. It's like, yeah, I mean, we had some tech advancements, but at the end of the day, like I've been using the same relative phone for the last 10 years. And if you were to ask me in 2012, when the first time I picked up that iPhone 4, I would be like, no way, man, 10 years from now, who's going to know? We're going to have Oculus, or we're going to be living in this like brave new world, for example. And we're not really there. ChatGPT is the first time I felt excited about something where I'm like, that's new. That's something. Now, is it good? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean,
the question.
any sort of tech progress.
Yeah.
There's good. There's bad.
There's trade-off. Yeah.
There's trade-off, and you hope the good is more than the bad. It usually is.
What's fascinating is there's a never-ending push towards technological innovation that we don't ever see stopping. We are 100% addicted to having the newest, best, greatest, latest, and then companies will continue to do that. I mean, they're going to be manipulating stock prices. They're going to be, but at the core of it, if you want people to buy shit, you have to make better shit.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have people that
I
are.
wish that was the core of it, though. Now, right?
Well, at least at the end of the line of what gets done. So, like, if you looked at the Earth from above, I use this analogy all the time. If you didn't know us, if you were from some other culture, some other planet, and you were trying to observe what human beings do, well, they make stuff. They keep making better stuff. There's a bunch of other stuff that goes on. There's a bunch of this keeping up with the Joneses, materialism. But what that does ultimately is it forces you to buy more stuff. Like the materialism instinct that people have, it's a base thing. It's like silly. Why do it? It's a part of human beings for some strange reason, a status thing. And that status thing allows people to continue to innovate and buy new stuff and continue to make better and better versions of that thing, so you're compelled to buy it. And that's ultimately leading towards something.
Right.
So much of public companies in particular, this is where the incentives are the most fucked up. The amount that they spend on research and development now is way less than it used to be, number one, and dramatically less than private companies.
Yeah.
Because, again, I was telling you the other day about this, what might be the greatest corporate con, like, in history, from this Indian industrialist who was, at least up until, like, the last week, the richest man in Asia. It's like fourth richest man on the planet after, like, Elon and Bezos and Bill Gates. And there's no doubt his company is big. He's got close ties in with the Modi government. He's built ports. He's like involved in energy, runs airports, all this stuff. But there was a big 100-page report that came out from this group called Hindenburg Research, which is known for sort of like identifying fraudsters. They're short sellers, so let me be clear. Like, they have a financial incentive also on the other side. They're betting on this company going down. But what they revealed was essentially that this guy, allegedly, they deny it, had set up all of these shell companies that they were using to manipulate their stock, which propped up the company's value, which also hid how bad their like debt situation was, that his brother was controlling a bunch of these shell companies. And so over the course of the past, week and a half, his suite of companies, like 7 different companies, have lost like half their value.
$100 billion in value.
$100 billion.
Over a week.
He's lost half of his fortune in a week, 10 days,
Yeah, the
something
scheme
like that.
is actually not on all that dissimilar from the SBF thing, which is basically Mauritius, which is offshore. They were using Mauritius-based shell companies to have cash there that they actually owned to buy their own stock, inflating the stock price. Based on inflation of stock, they're able to borrow actual cash against that stock. So the actual value of the stock wasn't as high as it supposedly was. SBF kind of did the same thing by issuing that own token, which they then claimed had value, and then borrowing actual cash based on the
Against that.
value of this false token. And that's how you get the billions and billions that stack up on each other. And this would all be funny if Adnani was not one of the most powerful men in India, if his companies did not prop up and was invested in by I think it's the State Bank of India. There is a tremendous amount of exposure in the Indian economy to Adnani is a hero there, alongside Ambani and a few of the other industrialists. There's a good book, if anyone's interested, called The Billionaire Raj, which is specifically about the rise of these new Indian oligarchs. And the amount of power that they yield in India is tremendous. So this is not a joke. I mean, this really would be like if Bezos was going down.
Yeah. It's
It is
that level.
But if anything, it's not even comparable because we have a lot of Bezoses. They really only have like 12, like 15
And
of
this
these
guy
types
was
of guys.
number one.
Yeah, he was the
wealthiest
biggest
man,
Yeah.
not just in India, but in all of Asia.
Yeah.
And like that, half his wealth gone. They were doing a stock sale,
Yep.
like $2.5 billion, raise more cash for the company, whatever. And he had to actually back out of it because of all of this.
There's a video of him talking
All of
about
this
it. He's like,
fallout.
we are well capitalized. We have great assets, good balance sheet.
And
Oh, my
his
goodness.
response. Now, listen, I want to be clear. The response was 435 pages.
Yes.
I do not claim that I read all of it, but in part, what it said was basically like, this is an attack on India, rather than responding to the specific claims. He's
Yeah.
playing to sort of like Indian nationalism
Oh,
to try
yeah,
to
yeah,
rally
yeah.
the
It's smart.
troops.
It's a smart thing to do.
If you criticize Anthony Fauci, you're criticizing science.
Science. That way he pulled the Fauci move.
Yeah.
That's what he did. I don't think it's working for him quite as well, though.
Wow, that's crazy.
Right?
Wow, what a house of cards. How many businesses are like that?
Exactly. Who knows?
Good question.
The thing about
Good
SBF
question.
was if CZ never does that tweet,
Right.
what happens, man? I
Right.
mean, he could be on the Forbes. He could be not even on the Forbes 400, on the Forbes 100. Like SBF, if this whole thing had been going, it's kind of like Madoff. Madoff only fell apart. I went deep on Madoff after SBF, and it was only 2008 that brought him down.
Yeah.
Like if the recession doesn't happen, Madoff sails off into the sun. Like he's fine.
I think SBF. I think whether it was then or sometime in the future, I think his ticket was going to get punched
Well,
because
he's on amphetamines and
Yeah,
banging
that's
9
right.
other weirdos in a penthouse in the Bahamas.
Yes.
I mean, those people are off the fucking rails. They
Yeah.
were nuts.
True.
Which I would be rooting for them if they weren't doing a swindle.
Right.
If they were really
If they
super
weren't stealing people's
geniuses
money, yeah.
that were like pulling off some amazing financial move, I'd be
Sure.
like,
Okay.
fuck
Go
yeah.
do it. Go do
Go
it.
nerds.
Yeah.
Let's go.
But no, I think because so much of crypto is collapsing now, and I mean that's why it looks like he denies wrongdoing, etc. That's why it looks like they got so overextended at Alameda, which was basically like the crypto
Yeah.
hedge fund, because they placed all these bets. The bets were going south. They needed more cash, and so they're tapping into their customer accounts over at
It's all a story
FTX.
of leverage. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just feel like with so many of these crypto bubbles and schemes and whatever, it's like they're just rediscovering all of the worst ills of the banking system.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, we did this new thing. We discovered a bank run. Like, wow, this is what happens when
Well,
people like
we
freak out
talked
and
about
come
it
and get
in
their
the green
cash.
room that they need regulation.
Well, they need
You have to have some
they need
sort
enforcement.
complicated.
It is a little complicated because I mean, look, ultimately, FTX was unwound. The existing laws do not let you commit fraud.
Right.
Right.
So there needs to be enforcement. Now, one of
Okay,
the things that we are keeping an eye on is at some point in the FTX run-up, when he's buying all these politicians and he's buying all his like puff piece coverage in the New York Times and everywhere else, there is actually some effort to investigate him coming from the SEC. And there was a bipartisan group of lawmakers that sent a letter that was like, hey, he's our boy. Like, he
They're like,
didn't do
don't touch
anything
the
wrong.
crypto
You know?
industry. What are you doing?
Yeah, but
he happens to have
specifically
donated
about
to
him.
all of them.
Yeah,
This
specifically
happens.
about this guy. And so did that lead to the regulators saying like, I guess we're going to like take a light touch. We're not going to dig into this. I don't know. That's a question that I have about how all this works. But, I think that's part of why him in particular, he cultivated this image on Capitol Hill. He cultivated this image with the media and was able to hold up this scheme for as long as he did.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Like you were talking, I don't know. On the one hand, I'm a lot more. I guess I'm more sympathetic to the original idea of Bitcoin. Like when we think, and to be fair, Bitcoin is very different than a lot of these other shit coins that are out there in terms of the invention by the invention of this mysterious man, and then it has a limited number of supply. The original selling point of it as a hedge against inflation, and also where I thought it was the most important was the idea of being able to get around sanctions, regulation, people being able to censor you. Where a lot of that came apart, though, and this was scary, was, if you remember, right before Ukraine, what was one of the biggest stories in the country? Canada. and the Canadian freedom protesters and how the Canadian government was seizing their banks. And then what was even crazier is they were actually seizing their Bitcoin. So it actually showed us one of the big choke points in crypto. I have some friends who work in the industry, and I haven't really gotten a good answer on this, which is, to be able to seize Bitcoin, that's because a lot of it was sent on the platforms, which are itself regulated. So, for example, Coinbase is still subject in the United States to U.S. regulation. In Canada, similarly. So the idea of the censorship-free money, it's possible if you know how to do it. I barely know how to do it. I'm not.
Wait a minute. So the government of Canada went into Coinbase and extracted Bitcoin?
I'm not going to say it was Coinbase necessarily, but they were. Jamie, I'm sure you can find this. It was Canadian government seizes cryptocurrency sent by U.S. citizens to the actual Canadian freedom protesters.
Okay.
And that was one of the problems, was that because some of that was on the exchanges, which are subject to regulation, it's the same thing as if I were trying to wire them money to a prohibited group in Canada. But you were looking at that and you're like, man, that level of censorship resistance, which I still really believe in. Like, we got to have something, in terms of, there's a current lot of pressure right now for the Fed and for the United States to create like a centralized digital currency, and even, essentially cashless. We basically live in a quasi-cashless society right now. If you think about China, one of the ways that they're able to implement their social credit score system is everything is within the WeChat app over there, and Alipay. It's all integrated, not only for your social credit score system, your Uber, all of that is there, and you tap to pay. Well, that's great for convenience. It's also, if you piss off the government, like, you can't pay for anything anymore. You can't get a bus ticket. You can't get all that. So I don't know what the
problem is when you have the wild, wild west. The people who are going to rise to the top it's not an accident that you end up with like psychopathic charlatans like SBF at the top of this thing, because it is like the time, in a way, the time before you had like a central bank and when you had all these different currencies competing with each other in the US. And so I, too, was sympathetic to the original idea behind crypto, which is like, look, fiat money is also just based on what we all decide to put value on. Now, I would say, like, our fiat currency is also backed by the United States government and the military, et cetera, and being the most powerful country on the planet. So there is more than just, like, a belief in it at this point. But, okay. And so if we have this, like, mode of exchange and this sort of, like, anarchist principles of organization, it was really a response, a philosophical response to the failures of 2008. When you see how bankrupt and corrupt our existing financial institutions are, and how rigged and how much they lie and how captured the political system is. And so I understand the impetus for it. But in reality, it has never been used as like actual currency to a significant degree. It just became a like purely speculative vehicle. And to your point, like the idea that the three of us could just go out and be like, we're making Rogan coin, and like we
could make a shitload of money.
We
on
like
that, by the
hired
way.
Kim Kardashian to sell you Rogan coin, and if we can like pump it up and do the confidence game enough, then we can run away with real cash and leave all these people holding the bag. When I look at that, I'm like, I think this went astray.
Yeah, it went astray, 100%.
No doubt.
I think this went
But isn't that
wildly astray.
inevitable?
Yeah.
I think it
With
was.
That's what they
some
would say.
new emerging
Right.
thing, you're going to have some crazy people that rise to the top.
It's like what Krystal was saying with the original U.S. currency. We didn't have centralized greenbacks in the United States till the Civil War, and that was because the government literally wanted to be able to print money and buy weapons and goods with it without having to pay gold. Before that, we had state-issued and banknotes, which was like a total free-for-all in the U.S. It was actually kind of wild, and it literally took the Civil War to be able to push back against that. And guess what? There was a ton of charlatans. There were silver runs. There were bank runs. There was like multiple panics of like 1816 or whatever.
Or even leading up to the Great Depression and the stock market crash of 1929, there was a whole buildup in the 20s of people were introduced to the idea of buying stock on margin, and like they didn't really understand what it meant, and there were all these like local dealers who were getting them in on it, and there was just tons of fraud, charlatans, people lying, all this stuff. And so after 1929, there were a lot of banking reforms that basically made banking boring, right? They separated all the gambling and wild speculation out from the just like basic customer deposit, like regular bank that people go to. And then, over the years, that was eaten away and those regulations were eaten away. And eventually you ended up sort of back to a pre-1929 situation where they were again allowed to speculate in these wild ways and there was no separation. And so after the housing crash in 2008, there was effort to reform the banking sector. There were some things that were done through the Dodd-Frank financial reform, but they never went back to just separating out those two pieces and making it boring again, the way that it was boring and stable, the way that it was. And so to me, I understand the response of crypto and looking at this and being like, this system is fucked. We need to just like do our own thing. Like this, it's corrupt. It's disgusting. I totally get that. But I think the only answer to it is to have better reforms of the existing system to make it like safe and less corrupt and not have this wild speculation that can create these bubbles that just like, destroy the entire economy and people's livelihoods.
Is that feasible?
Yeah, that's great. Well, that's what they would say. They're like, look, the system is corrupt. It's if 2008 happens and we have Dodd-Frank and the system doesn't get fixed, like, what are we supposed to do? I actually get that. I don't know. I'm really of two minds of it. On the one hand, like, I deeply sympathize with the individualism of like, look, we're going to take it into our own hands, boys. Nobody's coming to save us. Like, this is all we got. There are a lot of preppers actually who bought Bitcoin or sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars because they bought in very early. So shout out to those guys. On the other, look, at the end of the day, systems can change if enough people actually want to do something about it.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the stock market ban. I think that's actually probably step one. If we get to the point where we can just ban members of Congress from trading stocks, the institutional trust I think that we could all then have within the system, just at a baseline level, it would help a lot. It would help a lot to be able to get that. But of course, Nancy Pelosi is the speaker. She says, what was it? Wait, so we live in a free market economy. We're allowed to participate. She walks that back.
Well, when she said that, like, pushed the microphone.
Yeah.
Just walked off the stage.
Your
I was
Nancy
like,
Pelosi
that was
impression
good.
is
That
pretty
was
good.
That was wild. When she just walked
Yeah.
off the stage, I'm like, that is wild.
I mean, she's not the only one, though. I mean, there's it's a completely bipartisan issue.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of these guys, and they'll claim they're like, look, I don't have any inside information. I'm like, look, motherfucker, you're guilty. Like, you got to prove that you're innocent.
It honestly, I mean, listen, they do.
Yeah.
And like, obviously,
Yeah,
these are not
obviously.
geniuses.
Yeah.
And they're all like beating the market and beating people who are expert at this and whatever.
George Soros and Warren Buffett are not as good as Paul Pelosi.
Oh, wow.
He's better. He's better at trading.
He's just an
You see the
amazing
Google
trader. Has
trade
nothing
just the
to
other
do
day.
with.
Right
What?
before the antitrust suit
Yes.
was filed, it sold like $3 million. And
Yeah.
once again, you're just never going to convince me that you didn't know about that.
He
Like, you're just not
knew,
going
they
to.
Yeah,
knew,
but-
she
Right.
knew.
Okay,
they knew.
let's theoretically say, all right, we believe it. Like they didn't use their inside information. It almost doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Because ultimately, the bottom line is people fucking think that you use your information and are benefiting from it. And by
Yeah.
the way, when you look overall, like you could look at any individual trade and be like, oh, maybe
Mm-hmm.
not, who knows? But when you look at the numbers overall and you're like, all you motherfuckers are beating the market. No
Right.
fucking
How is that possible?
way.
Unusual
And if you
Not a
look at the
chance.
actual
Yeah.
speculation, the actual
The trades.
sales
Yes.
and trades, they fucking know.
It's
They know
outrageous.
something.
And they're not doing anything about it. Unusual Whales, shout out to him. He's really one of the guys who sparked this whole movement. Because he
Who is
published,
Unusual Whales?
He's like an anonymous Twitter account, and he's one of the first people who actually
Independent
published.
journalist type.
Yeah,
but
he
uses
published the
Twitter.
first trading. This was like 2021, whenever maybe 2020 actually. We're some of the first people who actually picked it up originally about the congressional trading numbers, and we went through the exact Senate. And he loops it all together as an institution and the way that it was able to beat the market consistently year after year after. And this is all publicly available
There he
data.
is.
Shout out to him. He's a great dude.
Yeah, definitely give him a follow. He's really
He does really good work.
And
yeah,
it's a
you can actually
lot.
see it all right there. The full trading report on politicians in 2022. And again, totally bipartisan. We
Yeah.
got Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Patrick Fallon, Susie Lee, David Joyce, Gary Peters. All look at the blue and the red there, all within the graph. And you can even see, like, look, it's everybody, like from all across the board, people who are supposedly against the system, people who are totally within the system. And that's what makes it so disgusting. We have got to ban this. Like,
19.8%. What does
Right.
that mean?
well, that she was down
Down.
2.8%. Well, and that's the other thing with Paul Pelosi. The guy is extraordinarily leveraged. Like, he's always trading options. He's not even just buying and selling individual stocks. He's making much larger bets on these things. I mean, he's got $100 million and access to shit you and I don't have. But
Boy, Debbie Wasserman Schultz at the top there.
yeah, she's got
doing
a
well.
nice little
Patrick
portfolio
Fallon,
return.
I don't even
Look
know
at
who that is.
51% on year over year in 2022,
nothing to
which
see
is
here.
crazy. I mean, if you compare that to the S&P 500, I'd actually be curious or what the 2022 S&P. Yeah, there you go. So S&P 500 is down 18%. Look at every single one of these individual members who are able to have portfolios which are beating the total market. It's just outrageous.
Pelosi's off her game, though.
Yeah,
Look at
she's
that.
actually off her game.
Yeah.
Seems like they threw just because everybody was onto their shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fucking threw
But
it a little
look
bit.
at the red and blue.
Exactly.
Look at,
It's bipartisan.
Yeah,
100%.
completely. And the top is
100%.
red.
Well, this is like a story of like hope, and it's very depressing because there was a whole grassroots movement to be like bipartisan. You know, the Republicans were pissed off about Pelosi and the Democrats were pissed off about the Republicans. Like everybody was like, all right, this is fucked up, right? Any thinking person who cares about the country would be like, this is fucked up. Why are we doing this? And so then because there's this organic movement, you see actually some people in the mainstream press start to cover it. There was actually a reporter at Insider. They started digging into the details of these trades and compiling reports. That leads to that, when you're talking about Nancy Pelosi at that press conference, that leads to her actually getting asked a question about it. And wasn't it incredibly revealing, her response in that moment? That leads to a backlash. Kevin McCarthy sees an opportunity with Republicans about to take it. He starts posturing like, oh, if Republicans take the House, we're going to do the stock ban. Of course, they haven't said shit about that since then. Pelosi actually feels some pressure, like, all right, we're going to try a thing. And they sort of like poison pill that to make sure it doesn't happen too. And that's where it's a mixed bag because you're like, all right, we got it on the menu. There was a lot of pressure. Politicians heard it. They had to do something. But then both parties, again, found ways to just completely, let the issue slide and not actually have to change anything.
That is an independent media story, though, because that's
is.
one of those where that guy published it. We started talking. This is not just us. This is a lot of people. Dave Portnoy, there's a lot of other people out there who've talked about it. A lot of independent media, people like you have also brought it up. That kind of put it in the pop culture conversation. You got TikTokers out there doing Pelosi trades. Like, they have huge accounts where Gen Z and millennials are totally bought into how corrupt the system is. That floats upward with the outrage. Insider picks it up. And President Biden actually originally had a line in his State of the Union just last year where he was going to endorse a congressional stock trading ban. The line was pulled at the very last minute.
Whoa.
Of all the things, you listen to their State of the Union, it's like a laundry list of checking the box on every fucking thing.
25 check boxes.
And
no
that's
stock
the
ban.
line. That's the line that gets pulled.
Gets
Amazing, right?
At whose request? That's a great question. I would love for somebody in the press to dig into that.
And Biden, to his credit, when he was a senator, he actually had a personal rule for himself. He did not engage in this. He did not buy and sell stock. So he would actually have a place of moral authority to say, like, let's not do this anymore. But somebody got to him.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a real corruption story.
Dirty business.
Yeah. Well, and again, like Republican, all these people like the Republican holdouts or Kevin McCarthy posturing like populist or whatever. This was not one of the demands that they made of like, let's get stock.
Should have made that demand.
They should have made it, but there's a reason why they didn't. And like
it needs
I
to
said,
be more public outrage.
Well, we're talking about it right now. Maybe it'll help. Honestly,
There you go.
there's a lot of Republican lawmakers who are obsessed with the JRE. Maybe they'll listen to this.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Boy.
Make your pitch. I mean,
boy.
and like I said, McCarthy, he brought it up at a moment when he thought it would serve him politically. But then the moment he actually got the gavel and took power, nothing.
That's the key to getting what you want in politics, though. That's, look, these people, they're never going to do anything because it's the right thing. You got to force them to do it so that it's politically advantageous. And look, there's actually a lot of room for some politician out there. Originally, I think it was John Ossoff, the senator from Georgia. He's a young guy. He's like 30-something. He's like maybe like 37, relatively young. I guarantee you, he's pretty online from what I can tell. He was the one who caught this. He goes, I'll just introduce a bill to ban this. He got a ton of good press for being the first senator to actually propose a ban. So we need to make it and create a system where right now it's politically advantageous to sell out to K Street, which is the lobbyists. That's where they all sell out to big business, Wall Street, military, industrial complex, any of these people. I think what I would love to do, and it's one of the aims of the show, was creating and rise with independent media and working with everybody, is to create an alternate system where you get rewarded for. We had a big conversation about Ukraine. Just let one politician say it. Right now, we've had like maybe two who've ever raised any questions. Rand Paul was one of the old people. He goes, I'm not going to even vote against the aid for Ukraine. Let's just have an auditor to make sure that it's all being
like an
spent
inspector
right.
general.
Yeah.
Nothing. They don't even vote for that.
Yeah.
And by the way, Like, what did we just talk about? Zelensky just fired like half of his cabinet for corruption allegations. Who do you think's paying the cabinet? Who's paying all the bills? We're literally balancing their budget. The United States Congress is. Which is
Truth.
like
Truth.
their economy is completely propped up by the United States.
And it might lead us to World War III.
It's possible. It's certainly possible.
But when we were talking about Ukraine, one of the things that I wanted to bring up that I didn't is there a solution? Like, if we're not going to donate tanks and missiles and jets, what is the rational solution? Is there a way to mitigate the loss of life? Is there a way to negotiate a way out of this? Is there a way on paper other than, Russia saying you win? Like, what is the way?
Well, the way would be, look, these are the conditions, Ukraine, at which we are going to support you. After that, we are not going to provide you offensive aid because we believe that we should have a diplomatic solution. You could convene. I mean, look, there's been no real effort between President Biden and Vladimir Putin to actually even sit down. Right now, there's all these EU, G7 leaders that are actually inside of Ukraine. None of them are asking any questions about diplomacy. It's really what it is this is a grand European NATO problem. So we all need to sit down together and hash it out. And look, if the Russians pull out of that, then okay, like game on. Like you're the ones who are pulling out. You're the ones who are saying that we're not going to have any engagement on this whatsoever. But we haven't even tried that. It was in the very beginning of the war. There were some negotiations that were happening.
Yeah. That's the thing. I'm not going to pretend this would be like easy.
Yeah,
like,
easy.
oh, put me in there and I like make it. And that's like the shit that Trump is truthing now. He's like, we'll get a deal on day one. Okay.
24 hours
Very,
out of
very
peace
easy to do. It's like, you're ridiculous. Like, it's not easy to do. It's a complex situation, be incredibly difficult. There may be no opening for diplomacy, especially right now. But Saagar is right to point to the fact that early on in this conflict, there actually were meetings happening between Russian officials and Ukrainian representatives. There were talks that were happening. And reportedly, they were kind of working out an outline. There were still some very difficult sticking points, based on the reporting that's available. And Boris Johnson, who was at that point Prime Minister of the UK, and of course they have been our closest ally in all of this, was dispatched to go to Kyiv and give the message to Zelensky. This was reported actually in Ukrainian press. We do not want you to make a deal. That was our posture. We do not want diplomacy. We do not want negotiations. So the thing that I object to is the idea that is sold by Biden and others of like, oh, it's just up to Ukraine. That's bullshit. They are where they are 100% because of us. This is an incredibly dangerous situation because of the proxy nature of it, because Russia certainly sees themselves, and they accurately should, as being in a proxy war versus us. And so the idea that we have no say and no influence over whether or not there are negotiations is completely bunk. And so, that's the piece where my other concern is that we're sort of building up to another Afghanistan situation where, we went in with one goal, like, okay, we're going to get the bad guys, we're going to get Osama. And then when we failed at that, we end up with this 20-year occupation and total disaster at the end of it. And no one can really say how or why we were there for so long. Like, how do we get to some sort of exit ramp in Ukraine? And that here the stakes are so much higher because, as you point out, it's like nuclear war and World War III on the line. And even if that's like a tiny chance, we should care a lot about that tiny chance.
Did you see Jimmy Dore on Tucker Carlson?
Yes. Yeah. He was talking about, what was he talking about? China? I think that's what it was.
Well,
I saw a clip that was
didn't
floating
see it.
around.
See if you can
Yeah.
play it.
Yeah.
It was the other day, but he was talking about the industrial
Yeah.
military complex.
Yes.
And the influence that they have on what we're doing in the world, and that this idea that we're some sort of, have you found it? I don't want to paraphrase it, but he went on this very, very powerful anti-war rant. And let's play this from the beginning.
Should I use a different source first?
Well, just
Reports
try
on
to.
China.
I don't know what this channel is.
I think
don't
it's
know if
on.
gonna get
Jamie,
it
I'm
or
pretty
not.
sure it's on his Twitter. I thought I saw on Jimmy's Twitter. I thought I saw a clip that was floating around there.
On Jimmy Dore's Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Real quick, sorry.
What was that one?
The one I had?
It was something about China.
It just I don't know.
That was the clip I knew that he was on Tucker. I knew he was there
Yeah.
to talk about China. I'm not sure.
There it
There
is.
it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So play that.
Hold on.
We're the ones provoking this war, just like we provoked the war in Ukraine. We are now provoking a war with China. And who benefits? I'll tell you right now. Your enemy is not China. Your enemy is not Russia. Your enemy is the military-industrial complex, which has been fleecing this country to the tunes of hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars. How many times are we going to have a defense secretary say, hey, we can't account for $2 trillion in the Pentagon again? Which has happened twice now in my lifetime. So again, people are being, the war machine cannot be stopped. Who's running this country? The war machine. It certainly isn't Joe Biden making these decisions. I would like to know who is making the decisions. And I just want to remind everybody, the United States is the world's terrorist. We just set the Middle East on fire in the last 20 years, and now we're doing a proxy war in Ukraine, which we provoked, NATO provoked, and it was just admitted that we provoked it by the former Prime Minister of Germany. And now we're trying to saber rattle with China, and they're predicting a war. Again, China's not going to invade us. China's not our enemy. We might have an economic war. That's what these are. These are economic wars. These are wars in Ukraine. It's about liquefied natural gas and making sure Germany and Russia never come together because we fear Russia's natural resources and manpower, and we fear them getting together with Germany with their technology and their capital. And so that's why we blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. That's why we're doing the Ukraine war. This is all about hegemony, imperialism, and economics. And if there's a Marine somewhere, it's there because they're about to steal some natural resources from another country. As everybody's screaming about what a bad guy Putin is for invading Ukraine, the United States is currently occupying a third of Syria. And which third is that? It's the third that has the oil. And how do I know we're there to steal their oil? Because the President of the United States said so.
And we're not even benefiting economically. Of course, that's the rub. Jimmy Dore, appreciate it. Thank you.
Nord Stream, man. I forgot about that one.
Yeah.
You remember how immediately people were like, oh, it was Russia, all of that. And then an independent panel actually just came out, I want to say a month ago. And they're like, no, we don't think it was Russia.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, who was it?
They're
then?
like, we may never know.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, really?
Well, it's really only a few people who could have done it.
We may never know.
Yeah,
Well, listen,
we'll never know.
I mean, the bottom...
Who killed Epstein? We may never know.
We may never know. May never know. I mean, the bottom line is, look, we've talked a lot about incentives. What's the incentive for the people who make bombs? Like, they're trying to make money. So, and they're very influential. They donate a lot of money in Washington. They go, revolving door, not just from like government officials, but also they go on CNN and MSNBC and whatever, and it's never disclosed. Like, oh, and by the way, this person is like on the board of Raytheon and happens to have a vested financial interest in what we ultimately do here. So, listen, it's at the core. The profit motive is at the core of a lot of what happens in this country.
Eisenhower's speech when he was leaving office.
That's
Yeah, it's interesting. You know what's something crazy is that even the Navy Secretary, we just covered this, he came out and was like, in a few months, we may have to choose between arming ourselves and arming Ukraine. And then the Biden administration made him come up and, quote, clear up that comment. He's like, oh, I didn't mean it that way. It was just, well, no, he actually did mean it that way because it turns out that we've been sending so many munitions and stuff that we have over to Ukraine. Yeah, there you go. If the defense industry can't boost production, arming both Ukraine and the U.S. will become challenging. He literally came out and said that we may have to choose if these weapons makers don't get their act together. Because actually, and this is the other thing where, military-industrial complex, one of the things that we forget is they're not actually particularly good at what they do. If we look at the F-35 program, it was a colossal disaster. It was over $1 trillion. It cost way too much, cost way too much money. The U.S., I want to say it was the Zumwalt class, a new Navy people are going to freak out at me, but it's either a destroyer or something. It's supposed to be a new generation ship. We were going to build like dozens of them. We only ended up building 3. They cost a shitload of money. The gun costs $1 million a round in order to fire it, so we're not able to even produce what we need. There was a big fight during the Iraq War too, where guys in the Pentagon would rather fund boondoggle programs than stuff that was actually protecting the lives of our soldiers, like MRAPs. Like they didn't want to fund some of the stuff that was actually protecting American soldiers on the ground in Afghanistan, in Iraq. The A-10 Warthog is another good example. Cheap plane, which actually has ability to assist people in a tactical situation because they're more interested in their ridiculous flying shit. So, and Jimmy also points to a correct thing, which is the Pentagon did just fail its fucking audit. We don't really talk about that. Like $100 billion, they have no idea what it is.
Every year.
Yeah.
They fail it every year.
Right.
It's a congressionally mandated audit. every other government agency is able to get through their audit.
There you go.
And the Pentagon, there you go, fails its audit for the 5th time.
There's no consequences to this either. They're getting more money than ever.
And it's
what
like,
are you spending it on?
It's not even close. It's not like they're off by a few pennies.
Yeah.
It's by like a few trillions or something. It's like, yeah, and everyone's just like, yeah.
Where do you think that money's
This is
gone?
fine.
That's a great question.
There
Where
you
does
go.
it go?
Representing $7 trillion in assets.
That's what we spent on the war on terror, just so people know. The entire GWAT was $7 trillion, and that's what's missing.
I'm reading the sentence wrong.
Right.
The $7 trillion is the part they were able to give a clean bill of financial.
okay.
That was only
Yeah.
39%. It was actually much more than $7 trillion.
Oh my God.
So 40% is $7 trillion, then we'll double it.
quite-
and add
quite a
that to-
system we
Okay,
have
so yeah,
here.
we're talking about like almost $9 trillion. That's more than we spent on the entire GWAT. Our entire economy is $15 trillion. I want people to let that sink
But
in.
we can't have health care. That'd be too much. It costs too much. Can't
No
do
universal basic income.
Can't
we can't
do it.
afford it.
Yeah, we can't afford that
Where's
shit.
that money going though?
Who knows? I read once that they have one of the largest HR systems in the entire world. And I was like, on what? Like, what are they spending that on? A lot of it, look, I have no idea. That's the point. Even with terms of Ukraine, this is a great media episode. CBS News did a whole documentary about how many of the weapons that we were sending to Ukraine were not making it to the front line, which is bullshit, right? Because if we're going to take all these weapons, I would at least hope a Ukrainian soldier is using it to protect his own life. Literally, the day after that documentary went live, he had to delete it. CBS News retracted it and said, no, actually, the situation has changed. It's not true. That report was out of context. We're going to reissue it.
It was
They just
out
never
of
came
date.
back
They
to
said it was out of date.
They said it was out of date.
And then, yeah.
They were talking about the vast majority of the arms we were sending to Ukraine weren't getting there. And also, we have no audit. We have no way to independently verify that anything that we send to Ukraine is actually being used by Ukraine in the way that we want it to.
How much money have we sent over there?
Well, in terms of how much we've actually spent,
military aid or overall.
if you want to look it up, Jamie, it's called like Der Kegel or something like that. There's a tracker that does country by country and breaks it by economic, financial, and military. I believe we have sent approximately between 25 and 30 billion. We have an extra 70 billion appropriated to Ukraine. Here's another crazy thing, because we actually read these laws because we talk about our show. So it doesn't just work like the president of the United States shall have X amount of money to send tanks to Ukraine. No, it's a slush fund. Biden has a $70 billion slush fund, completely to the discretion of the president of the United States. He could wake up tomorrow if he wanted to and ship any weapon system in possession of the United States over to Ukraine. We have no congressional authority. It has already been appropriated. We have no way as a population to push back against that.
Or-
Congress abdicated its responsibility in this case.
Or he could not wake up tomorrow and then it'd all be in the hands
Yeah.
of fucking Kamala Harris.
That's the only thing that scares me more.
Just even more
Can you
terrible.
imagine that lady with her finger on the button? We're fucked. His 80-year-old heart is the only thing keeping us alive
I mean,
right now.
at least
Yeah.
Biden stood up to the generals when it came to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Like, at least he had that in him. Kamala, scary. Scary shit.
You know she would start a war with Russia.
Do you think
know it.
so?
She'd bumble us into one. I think so. I think in terms of her competence, she cares about MSNBC. She cares about groupthink. She cares about the elites, like really loving her.
Well,
Biden,
it's-
to his credit, on some areas of foreign policy, is willing to buck that a
It's
little
very easy to be manipulated by these people because you see what happened when Biden pulled out of Afghanistan. And I acknowledge it was a mess. It was a disaster. It was ugly. It was not good. All of that. But you see the way that, they came out in force because they hated this decision. They wanted us to continue to be there forever because this was like the endless gravy train for them. And so, that was the most effective, most potent criticism against it. It was uniform across the board with the media. And so that they did the same sort of stuff to Obama. They'll leak against you. They'll really damage your approval rating. They're really tied in with the media in terms of they're leaking to their sources and they will go on and make their own case, et cetera, with no disclosure that they have financial incentives involved. So it's very, very easy to be manipulated by the people who want to be in a place forever or want to start a war or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I think Trump was subject to the same forces. Obama was subject to the same force. And I think part of why Biden in this limited instance was able to buck that trend is maybe perhaps just because he's been around for so fucking long.
Obama got totally rolled by the generals. Great book, Bob Woodward, Obama's Wars, about the very first year of the Obama presidency. He promised to run on the good war, Afghanistan, but he's not necessarily wedded to a surge The Obama's Wars book just details how Biden was the only guy in there being like, Mr. President, what the fuck are we doing in Afghanistan? What should we be? He's like, why should we send 40,000 whatever more troops? What are we going to do? What's our end game? Let's just have a counterterrorism mission. And David Petraeus, Mike Mullen, and all the other generals in the Obama White House were leaking against President Obama and actually actively undercutting him to the New York Times and to the press to create a Obama is soft on terrorism narrative, specifically so they could do a surge in Afghanistan under Stanley McChrystal. And look, it's complicated, but if we look back on that, did it really buy us anything in the long war of history of Afghanistan? I know personally people who were blown up during the surge in Afghanistan, and I also know how much it hurts them emotionally to watch ground that they fought and lost their brothers for, lost limbs for, get retaken by the Taliban several years earlier. It's just like we're talking about with Ukraine. What is the end game? And the end game is not something that Washington really likes to talk about. And even if you're looking at the pull-out situation on Afghanistan, it's like, well, why should we stay in Afghanistan? If you're listening to the media, it was like, because so Afghan girls can go to school. And look, I feel very bad for Afghan girls. I do not wish a situation where they are unable to go to school. Does that mean that we should have people there in perpetuity and spend $200 million per day and have several American soldiers get blown up by an IED? I'm sorry, I don't think so. I think there's a lot of bad shit that's happening all across the world. But they're never going to frame it that way. And that's why, man, the media on this, on war in particular, they offer no nuance. Afghanistan was a real red pill moment for Krystal and I because, and look, I'm not defending it. I'm not saying it wasn't a shit show. What's the alternative? They were like, oh, we should have surrounded the city of Kabul. I'm like, so you want to send thousands of American soldiers to create a perimeter around the city of Kabul? That suicide bomb that happened in the airport, it would have been that times 100. In terms of we were occupying and surrounding an entire city. There are valid criticisms of we should have held on to Bagram, we shouldn't have abandoned the military base or whatever in that. And that's a tactical consideration. I'll leave that to the people whose job it is. But on a broader strategic level, why should we have stayed in Afghanistan? And I haven't heard a particularly good answer to that.
Well,
yeah.
You know how much they actually cared about the women and girls by the fact that now that those women and girls are like starving in a mass famine, they don't give a shit.
Yeah.
They don't cover it. They don't cover the fact that they're like that we're partly connected to it because of the fact that we, you know, are continuing to hold their central bank reserves. And that's just now we're over that. We've moved on. Now we're focused on humanitarian stories elsewhere. And so it's just very selective, and it's weaponized humanitarianism because Americans are good people. Like, people don't want to see someone suffering. And so they'll use the legitimate humanitarian concerns to try to achieve their aims. And then once those aims are accomplished or not accomplished, well, they don't give a shit.
Yeah.
Oof. This is not a rosy picture you two are painting.
Well, it can be. We went from the stock ban, which I thought was a rosy one.
I wanted to talk to you about something that I remember you discussing that I wanted to get clarity on.
Okay.
What was that story that you discussed where there was a company that was working with China, and China had bought a large stake in the company? It was about chips and AI.
Okay. I forget the exact name of the company, Jamie, but it's basically called the Heist of the Century. If you Google like Heist of the Century, China, semiconductors, I think it was called AML. It was a British semiconductor company. Any American or Western business is required to do business in China has to have a Chinese subsidiary. So essentially what happened is the Chinese subsidiary, I believe, of AML was stealing the technology from within it. And after they were reprimanded for something like this, the CEO of the Chinese subsidiary just said, nope, I'm taking it. He stole all of their IP, created an independent business backed by the Chinese government, and is now spinning up, based on their IP, semiconductors that were originally intellectual property of this British semiconductor company. And the reason that this matters is that is just the tip of the iceberg for IP theft that is happening with respect to China. It's one of the reasons why, if you look at Chinese or American businessmen who do business over there, they fully and readily admit the amount of IP that has just been straight up stolen through their fake legal process of this Chinese subsidiary. But really, it's just a farming operation. There's no such thing as private industry in China. You know, I talk about with TikTok all the time, the CEO, Zhang Zhiming, he actually was forced to pull one of ByteDance's apps from the Chinese App Store and apologize because it was not supporting, quote, socialist principles. He was like, I apologize to this is the CEO of TikTok today, the owner of TikTok. Everything there is totally controlled by the government. They're very savvy and they're very smart. And at this point, they've actually even reached a point where, in some cases, they don't even need our IP. In some areas, they are far more superior and advanced than we are. One of the ones that scares the shit out of me is electric vehicle batteries. So the entire EV battery supply chain is connected to China in some way. You've talked about the cobalt and all of that. And one of the things that Siddharth brought up on your show was that it's the Chinese companies that are working with these Congolese gangs. Chinese don't give a shit about labor. I mean, it's not like we give a shit either, so to be fair. But anyway, they're willing to come in and be like, look, we want the cobalt, give it to us. This is actually part of the reason why Elon is in a precarious position. A huge part of the Tesla EV battery supply chain is in China. Even here in the United States, a lot of the new EV battery plants that are being built, it's a Chinese subsidiary and a conglomerate that is behind that. And look, what did we come through with the whole pandemic? If you're going to have critical supplies being manufactured and connected to China in some way, they're always going to put their interest, as any country should, above your own. You need to have some sort of resilience. Like if we get into Taiwan is another example. TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturer, they are building a plant here in Arizona. They're building, I think it's a $100 billion plant, which is great. I'm glad that they are, but it takes a decade to spin those things up. They create 92% of the world's most advanced chips. If we have a conflict in Taiwan, I always talk about this on the show, we are all turning this shit into the government so that they can create missiles and bombs. Like they will literally need to rip the semiconductors and chips out of our cell phones, out of our computers, because we're not going to have anything. Like 92% of the world's most advanced chips, everything goes dark. Like everything is turned over into some sort of ration thing. Chips is the new gold. It is one of the most precarious as an industry for the United States that we remain in. The CHIPS Act was a great step in the right direction that the Biden administration passed, but tip of the iceberg, man. I mean, that's a whole other level.
I mean, that is the, like, if we're looking for a more positive story, less like gloom and doom, the Biden administration has like dipped their toe in the water of industrial policy, recognizing that, I mean, the best response to China, the problem for us is being so interdependent where, you know, the pandemic, you come to realize like, oh, fuck, they make all the masks. Like, oh, shit, they make
Vitamins,
all the like, all
drugs,
this.
Yeah.
And so there was, and then the other piece is we realized with these sprawling just-in-time supply chains that they were incredibly fragile, right? That if you have a disruption, your whole economy is like going to go to shit. You're going to have inflation. You're going to have all these backups at the ports and all this stuff. So they have dipped their toe in the water of having industrial policy that makes us more resilient, less reliant on these other countries, including the Inflation Reduction Act had a lot in it for bringing that like green energy production and EV battery production to our shores, and has requirements about like where those batteries are built and where the sourcing comes from. But it really is just starting to dip your toe in those waters ultimately.
We're more than a decade out. It's still so difficult. I mean, the sourcing on the EVs is such a nightmare. And if you're trying to get, conflict Creek cobalt or lithium, right now there's a huge battle right now in South America, in Mexico, in Chile, and elsewhere where Chinese companies are trying to buy all of the lithium deposits, which of course you need for a lithium-ion battery. And if we also, I mean, look, this shit takes a long time. I think that's just the one thing I want people to, you don't just snap your fingers and build a semiconductor fab. You need water. If a single human hair gets into the TSMC facility, the whole thing shuts down. This is the most sophisticated manufacturing basically in the entire world, and we're trying to rebuild it overnight. It's very, very, very difficult. And then even if you think about from an infrastructure point of view, so we have an explosion right now in electric vehicles. I think that's great. I think EVs are really cool. They're really fun to drive. But if you don't have a Tesla, like where do you charge? If you're driving long range, like where are you going to charge it? It's not like we have a ton of EV battery stations.
We need the infrastructure.
Right. We
really
don't have
badly.
the same gas station infrastructure that we all have. We're decades behind on that. So anyway, I would love for the U.S. government to intelligently invest in that. And a lot of this is ideological. So another thing with the Inflation Reduction has a bullshit name. You should probably just called it like a clean energy bill, which probably would have polled better than a fake inflation reduction.
Yeah.
Whatever.
That was Joe Manchin's innovation.
One of the important things
Good job,
is
Joe.
ideology, right? Which is not ideologically investing in technology because we want it to work, but because it actually works. Nuclear is a huge part of this conversation. We talked a ton about it on our show. For a long time, we had tax credits, clean energy tax credits were only applicable to wind and solar. Wind and solar are fine. I think they have a lot of problems. Solar in particular is very filthy in order to manufacture. A lot of it is manufactured in China, and we actually rely on China to build.
You also need batteries for
Right.
it to be
Battery
sustainable
storage.
for when, the wind is not blowing and the sun
Yes.
is not shining. Yes.
It's complicated. Whereas nuclear has like a 93% rate at which it's always being able to run. It's actually even more powerful than natural gas, very reliable. Unfortunately, we haven't built a new nuclear power plant in the United States since 1974, which is insane, right? And, luckily, California decided not to totally lose its mind and close the Diablo nuclear power plant. Here in Texas, I think only 13% or whatever of our power comes from nuclear. We get more power from coal, I believe, here in Texas than we do from nuclear in the year 2023. It doesn't make any sense. The point is that even if we wanted to, though, and this is the fair criticism, it takes a long time. But with all of these things, no time like the present. Like, we got to start now.
Yeah.
The current system is not working. Texas, a lot of the power just went out here in Austin. One of the reasons why, from what I've been able to read so far, it's actually not the grid. It's because power lines are constructed above ground. And the people are like, okay, well, why do we do that? It's cheap. It's a lot more expensive to have to bury these things underground, so it's a trade-off. And I think that's fair. It's a once-in-a-3-year or so event, but even if we look at the previous grid failure here in Texas, it was failure to weatherize the natural gas grid. So a lot of this stuff is preemptive investment to make sure that old people don't die in the middle of a freeze, or that horrible situation like in Buffalo, right, where people were losing power and freezing to death
was awful,
in their cars. It's like, that is why we need to have more forward thinking as a country and actually get some agreement about these things. And frankly, we're gonna have to throw a shitload of money at it. Like, it costs a lot of money, but the idea that people say, oh, but that's that's like government subsidy. Listen, we subsidize the shit out of the oil industry. Like, you really think we don't subsidize oil? Of course we do. It's critical energy infrastructure. There's so much regulation around it. You can't even get a new nuclear power plant approved if you were to apply to, I think it's the FERC. It's like the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So we need reform on all of these things just to make life better in America. And unfortunately, a lot of it is just corrupted so that it's not really possible. And a lot of it is ideological, too. We have to be honest about that.
We have a lot of short-term thinking, a lot of profit-driven thinking, and then that bleeds over into government officials as well because of the corporate campaign contributions. And so, they don't care really what happens 10 years from now or whether it's good for the U.S. or for China or anyone else. They care about, is it good for their bottom line?
It's crazy because all the things that we discussed, healthcare, energy, all the issues that we have, and that's where it gets really crazy when you look at the money that we're putting into other things like Ukraine.
Oh yeah.
That, like, if we had the resources to do what we're doing right now currently, that means we had the resources to attack all these problems domestically.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
But we just don't have consensus around it. With Ukraine, they snap their fingers. They basically 99% of what they want. Nobody in Congress has the balls to actually vote against it. I believe it was a unanimous vote, I think, in the Senate, or semi-unanimous, or whatever.
Here's the question about that. Why are the Republicans opposed to sending more arms to Ukraine?
Are they? Why aren't they more opposed?
Why are they opposed? Because some Republicans
are.
Well,
Yeah.
it's you can count them on one hand. I mean, they might say it, but they all vote for it, right? I mean, how many of them actually voted against the new? Jamie, you might be able to look it up. What the actual vote count was on the extra $50 billion to Ukraine. I'm not 100, or at least the original $50 billion. It was almost unanimous in terms of what was sent over there. And look, I think a lot of them, what they're saying is a more financial perspective of what you're talking about. They're like, hey, why should we spend $50 billion to Ukraine if we have all these problems here? I mean, I don't necessarily agree 100% with that failing. Yeah, 11 senators who voted against the Ukraine aid bill, but that means that 86 of the entire chamber did end up voting for it. And if I were to look at it, I would be willing to bet a lot of them are fiscal Republicans. So Josh Hawley, Mike Brown, Boozman, Crapo, Haggerty, Lee, Loomis, Marshall, Tommy Toro. These are mostly more libertarian types, so they're going to be more concerned on the spending side. But, the critique that we've all talked about here on the show today, you will not hear a single word of this out in the mainstream. I have not seen one intelligent discussion in any format of mainstream media on Ukraine raising any of the valid points that we just did, because the lobby and the denunciation of, oh, you're pro-Russia, oh, you're spouting Putin talking points and all that is vicious. And a lot of these people just succumb to that, unfortunately. I really don't know how to get around it. But, if I can have anything take away is what you said is, look, if people were willing to unanimously, relatively agree to send $100 billion to Ukraine, and we have all these problems that we just talked about, that shows you what the priority is. I always look at what's the bipartisan consensus in Washington. That's the only shit that actually gets done.
Yeah. Well, a perfect example. So we passed during the pandemic this expanded child tax credit. Phenomenally successful program. Lifted like half of all kids that were in poverty out of poverty. They did research on the way that parents were spending this. They were spending it on their kids. They were spending it on enrichment for their. It was like unanimously great policy that worked really well. And Republicans decided they were against it, and Democrats just like let it expire without a peep. And so again, it's like, the hard thing is so many people's political approach is so focused on like whatever the cultural outrage of the moment is, that things like that don't even get surfaced. They don't get debated. They don't get discussed. And then this program, which was one of the most successful programs we've done in a long time, just dies.
Oh, that reminds me. I know you've been talking about UBI and concerns about it. So we actually been doing a lot of deep dive into this. And we looked at a couple of new studies. There's a new one actually just came out that a big part of the, quote, labor shortage is actually men who were working much longer hours during the pandemic, cutting back on their hours. So it's not, and actually it's Matthew Iglesias tweeted this study. If you want to see it, Jamie, it's from the National Bureau of Economic Research. So it's a couple of things. It's a cutback in the amount of hours that people are willing to work. Also, because 2020, with the initial reopening, there was more labor ability to bargain. Many people were not willing to go back to work at the same wages. One of the concerns around unemployment I know that you had raised and others was, people are getting all this unemployment, they're not going back to work. And there were certainly some cases of that true, but we had a interesting natural experiment where they actually ended unemployment benefits back in 2021. It had little to no change on the overall employment rate.
Yeah.
So even when you took away the unemployment benefits, all of the anecdotal stories of like, I can't get somebody in because they're getting unemployment, they didn't want to work. Actually, when they stopped getting unemployment, a lot of them didn't go back to work. And it wasn't just because they had money saved up, because we know right now we have some of the highest credit card debt in modern American history, which is never a good sign. In fact, many bank accounts are below pre-pandemic levels. And so there's actually just been a fundamental reset in the way, a cultural reset in the way that a lot of people approach work. A lot of it is women. One of the fascinating things that happened is we had, for the first time in modern American history, we had an increase actually in the amount of babies that were born. The pandemic baby bump that happened from 2020 and 2021, we've almost never had that happen before.
People were bored during the pandemic.
People were bored, and they had more time and they were able to plan pregnancy, be at home, not have to worry about 1 week or whatever of maternity leave. So we're living in a really interesting moment in the way that people have evaluated their relationship with work.
There's a real reorientation going on, especially for like white collar workers.
Yes.
Who were very wrapped up in their whatever their work dramas were, and their whole life was centered around work and climbing that ladder and whatever. And so when they were forced to go remote and all of that was stripped away, it was like, why is this the only part of my life that I'm focusing on? This thing that I don't even really like, when I have like a family, I have a community, I have other things that are important to me. And I don't think I think that is a dramatic mindset shift that is probably not going away, like a cultural mindset shift. And you see all these people too, like moving to different areas, valuing different things in terms of their quality of life. And so, as we look at the labor force participation rate, a lot of the decline was actually people not leaving their jobs, not that they didn't want to work, but just working fewer hours and being unwilling to like just dedicate their entire waking life to their job.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably a good thing, right?
I think
so.
it's a good thing.
Yeah.
The reevaluation process is always good because there's going to be a bunch of people that just course correct.
Yeah. I mean, I think listen, the three of us, we get to do things that we really love, right? We're passionate. We feel like it makes a difference. Like we, eat, sleep, drink it. And that's rare. That's really rare. Most people are, they're like punching the clock. They're doing their thing to be able to get a check, to be able to support their families. And so, there's been this sort of like, I don't know, ideology sold around careerism to especially like college educated white collar workers that like this is the thing that's supposed to be who you are in your whole life. And I think taking a step back from that and being more intentional about like, well, is that actually what I want my whole life to be about? And maybe there are other things that are outside of the workplace that are more meaningful to me, that provide me, more happiness or more joy or more fulfillment in my life. I 100% think that that's a positive thing.
That's our bright note. We should end on that.
There you go.
Let's do it.
I like it.
That's a
Found
positive.
I think it's great.
Yeah, I think it's a positive
Yeah,
direction.
absolutely.
Listen, I appreciate you guys very much. I love your show. I'm so glad you're out there. I'm so glad you're independent. You're
Thanks
free.
to you, man.
So are we.
Yeah.
No, listen,
Trust me.
It's because of you guys, 100%. But thank you very much. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Joe.
Tell everybody how they can consume your show.
BreakingPoints.com. That's the best way. You can
the
support
best
us.
way?
Watch us on Breaking Points on YouTube, Breaking Points on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts.
All right. Thank you guys. Appreciate
you,
you.
Joe.
Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye, everybody.